Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Finance and Audit Standing Committee for Tuesday, March 27th. We're meeting today on the traditional territory of the Squamish Nation. I have a motion for adoption of the agenda.
So moved.
Moved by Doug, second by Patty. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. We've got committee minutes to approve from way back in October. Moved by Doug, seconded by Peter. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Any business arising from the minutes? Seeing none, we'll move on to business. And I forgot to amend the agenda. Darn it! Yes. I want to go back to adoption of the agenda. I want to add an item 5, which is just a council discussion about the speculation tax because of the announcements made by the province yesterday. And our letter hasn't been submitted yet, that we talked about last week, so we just wanted to revisit that conversation for a few minutes. So, those who moved the agenda and seconded?
Friendly amendment.
Friendly amendment?
Yeah.
Got it, we're good. All right, all those in favor? Opposed, motion carried. Okay, now we'll go to the business of the meeting. So first up is the discussion on purchasing delegation interim policy, and we do have a motion in front of us. So I will turn over to Christine Matthews.
Thank you, Chair Elliott and Council. Christine Matthews, Chief Financial Officer, and we're back here today to talk about the Purchasing Authority bylaw and policy. The key goals today is I'd like the committee to review the draft policy and hopefully make a decision to replace the current policy with this or a reiteration or edit of this. And I'd also like to seek direction from the committee to amend the Delegated Purchasing Authority bylaw to bring back to Council at a later date, preferably in a close meeting. Just to provide some quick background, a reminder that back on September 5th, we met with the committee and provided to get some input from for the policy, the role of council and levels of delegation. We also in 2018, during the financial plan policy, during the financial plan preparation, I'm not sure why I said policy there, we approved consulting and late year FTE in 2018 to start to look at procurement in a more substantial way, possibly with an eye to some centralization or at least some expertise in-house to assist the departments that are currently in a decentralized procurement process. Also to really review the business processes, the organizational structure, and better define roles and responsibilities under that. For the procurement structure of a very rapidly growing organization. A key driver for that is also the Business World Project, which in order for us to actually maintain and keep purchasing on something other than a manual system, we would probably need some resources to help man that system. So rather than having everybody entering their information directly into the systems, it can get a little bit wild and woolly with the procurement process. So potentially it may be that this review indicates that that's the level of resource we need, or it might indicate a higher level resource that helps more with the large dollar procurement. So that remains to be seen, and that still has to be done. The key around that discussion is that today I'm really bringing in an interim policy. We're basing it on what we do today and how we survive today. The goal of it is to reduce some ambiguity and some impracticalities that were in that policy, and to also better align it with the bylaw, the Delegation Authority bylaw. Further on the background, on September 5th, we outlined a number of issues that we were running into with procurement. The key one being the policy and bylaw conflicts, and that's the number one thing that I went to remove. We had complaints back from staff about policy ambiguity, and there was also some really interesting roles and responsibilities for a decentralized system. The roles were ambiguous in the policy in terms of who was responsible for what, so we've cleared those up. The scope of the policy, so it never really talked to what wasn't involved or wasn't included in the policy, and we fix that with this new policy so that we clearly indicate some things that don't fit the parameters of this policy and make that so there aren't a bunch of exceptions where staff again are unclear as to what must be followed by this and what must not. And then another key concern for everybody emerging over last year was how are we managing change orders and when did we need to come back to council for that? What is the authority of staff within that around here? We also, with a decentralized system, it is harder to train and maintain consistent policies across the organization and to assist and monitor compliance. That's one of the key reasons we're looking at a broader business process review in this year, in 2018. I talked to already the business world resourcing. One of the other issues that came up a few times last year was supplier solicitations, and we had an opportunity to talk to the committee in September about how we might tighten that discussion up a little bit. Obviously, we still want to be very progressive and host new ideas and innovations, but how do we do that and still maintain our transparency and competitiveness in our procurement policies? And then the other thing we talked to council a little bit about was roles and responsibilities of council and staff, and came back to the fact that while we were still decentralized and without internal expertise, council still wanted stewardship over the procurement policy and awarding, but we did talk to you a little bit about whether we could expand authorities a little bit just to help reduce delays and allow us to be a bit more nimble. So specifically, we hope this interim policy, certainly the goal was to rewrite to reference the bylaw. So instead of having the policy perhaps contradict or get out of date with our delegation bylaw, it literally just refers you back to the delegation bylaw for the authority level so that we can change the bylaw as we see fit. We've removed an August exception. So there was a very blatant inconsistency in that our delegating bylaw didn't call for or allow for an exception in August when council wasn't sitting, but the policy said that staff had that authority. So that was obviously a very blatant policy that absolutely contradicted the delegation bylaw. So we've removed the August exception out of the policy. We have removed, there was some clauses in the last policy that we think probably walked on the wrong side of competitive bidding and might get us on the wrong side of the courts if we ever had to work with that. So we've removed any local preference clauses that are specific about local preference. And we can explore that more as we go into a broader procurement review in terms of how we still deal with sustainability and issues of that nature. But right now, we've excluded that local preference clause. We did specifically address things in the policy that don't fall under this policy, just to make that clearer for staff and everybody. And again, a specific section on change orders and solicitations. I think the best thing to probably do is to go through at a high level with council some of the key things, how the policy is structured, and then if you have any questions or issues as we go through that, I'd love to hear them. I'll look to the committee to decide how much into the gravel you want to get in here, or if you're comfortable. So maybe as we go through each section, if the committee, through you, Chair, wants to ask me specific questions about a section, that hopefully will expedite the review. And that's agreeable?
Sounds good.
Okay. So on page 11 of your agenda, just very briefly, obviously, the purpose of this policy. I'm just going to highlight a couple key things. Obviously, we wanted to better define responsibility and accountability for the procurement activities. We want to mitigate our legal risks with the courts and encourage competition in the marketplace. We're always looking to secure best value and best practices. So those are some of the key things. Obviously, we're always looking for competitive bidding where possible. The next section, still page 11, section 2 is all the definitions. I'm only going to pull out a couple for you here. 2.1, authorized staff. So this really speaks to the delegation policy 1721 that talks about who can and who can't procure and to what levels may they do that. So we'll get to that bylaw later on in the agenda, but that really makes it very clear who can and can't contract for the organization. And then best value is another key concept that we'd like to just outline for council. It's sort of this optimal combination of compliant responses to a district's terms and conditions in a contract document. It looks at various things, including total cost of ownership and accordance with specific criteria that we might have set out in the competitive documents. So again, this policy really stresses that when you go out to tender or RFP, you need to be very clear about what we're going to evaluate on, and they need to follow these principles of best value. Okay. And then I also, probably another key definition that I'll bring out is just emergency. What constitutes an emergency? It's defined as an unforeseen, present, and or imminent event. It is caused by accident, fire, explosion, technical failure, basically absolutely unforeseen things. It can include, though, technical failures of key infrastructure and forces of nature. And essentially, we're looking for, does it threaten the community? Would it have irreversible impact to the environment? Or is there some cost mitigation or immediate action that's required that would otherwise cost the organization considerably more if we don't step in and mitigate? So that would constitute an emergency, and as you'll see further in the policy, there are parameters for staff to deal with emergencies in those situations without sitting with council in that event. And we'll talk about what we have to do thereafter, though. Okay. One of the key things I think at the very last... Oh.
Just on definitions, farther on it talks about the word mayor, and I thought you might consider putting a definition of mayor in.
Oh, okay.
It would be not only the mayor, but also the acting mayor from time to time.
Sure.
And sometimes the acting acting.
Or, yeah, person authorized to act as acting mayor or something like that. So that just covers off that situation where it is the acting mayor and not the mayor. And the other is the CFO and the CAO. My understanding is you have to have appointed alternates. These are statutory positions, I believe. And so you might include those people as part of the authorized people or the alternates in the absence of the CFO or CAO.
So I believe our delegation bylaw itself does talk to these substitutions.
Okay.
So I was under the impression that was kind of covered by that authority down perspective, but absolutely we can look at adding mayor or acting mayor if that's not sufficient to the committee.
Thank you.
Okay. I just wanted to finish off. An emergency does not refer to circumstances created by project administration issues, lack of sufficient planning, or failure to comply with district policies.
Yes.
About 3.6, are we going to put I think you mentioned the solicitation of business.
Mm-hmm.
We've had people come to committees before and we've sole sourced things based on the fact that they're, we've done a lot of sole sourcing in the past. Does this preempt that as far as, I'm just thinking contracts like bus shelters and other things where we haven't actually gone to the public.
Are you coming to
So I'm coming to that as part of part
Okay,
three.
so I'm gonna go through.
She's going
Absolutely,
to-
I'm
Just
happy to
definitions.
speak to that. Under 3 is the key principles, and one of them is the solicitation. It's the last bullet point. So if that's okay, I'll work my way down. And
Yep.
okay.
Thank you.
So open and transparent. Obviously, we want to make sure that our procurement policies are perceived and actually fair and open and allow the best competition to occur. Best value, we already talked about that concept, so we're really looking for staff to look at best value. And 3.2 also indicates we want them to do it with IDA integrity and fair access for others to be able to bid. Obviously, we expect our staff to comply with all laws, bylaws, and policies, and that includes treaties. And some of the information in 7.2 you'll see actually responds to our treaty requirements. We are looking for staff to look for cooperative agreements, so that's very specifically laid out in the principles. We would like them to look at BC, where they already do substantially high-level procurements, and we often get great price reductions because of that, and we don't have to go through the competitive bid process because they already have on our behalf as a British Columbia organization. So we're really looking for that. I think, I hope that I'm on the right side of the council and committee, generally wanting us to look for opportunities where we can bulk buy or source with other municipalities. We saw a great example of that last year with the fire department, working with other fire departments to get better prices and broader bids, so we're encouraging that. Obviously, we always want an eye to environmental stewardship. I think when we revisit this policy in a more fulsome way with a procurement expert or with our facilitator, whichever that shakes down to be, I think we'll probably want to flesh out some of our environmental stewardship policies a little more broadly, but right now we're just saying it's up to staff to keep that in mind as they're looking at procurement contracts, okay? And then the solicitation, to Councillor Chappelle's point, the solicitation not for the grounds, are not grounds for single source. So by all means, we're very open, and 3.6 speaks to this specifically. The district is open to innovative and financial opportunities and certainly encourages the committee to share their ideas with staff and council. However, solicitation for business is discouraged and will not constitute grounds for sole or single sourcing of a contract. And does not preempt policy requirements. So bring us the idea, but staff and council, we'd like you to be very clear with them as they come in, that that's great, we love the idea, but now we're probably going to go out for an RFP. And thanks for the information, and hopefully you'll be the best proponent and we can pull you in. And that would be, I think, the best way to stay on the right side of that, and I'm looking for council feedback.
Okay, Councillor Chappelle.
Thanks, I completely agree with that. It seems like in the past we've had people come to council. I worry even about car sharing and not doing proper solicitation for bids of service that could possibly be procured by other companies, including bus shelters and the other things that have come to council, where they come to committee and just by the fact of them being there, they end up receiving contracts with the district. And whether we do our full and proper due diligence with going out to other companies or other solicitations province-wide.
Any other comments on 3.6, Council? I think that captures the spirit of.
And again, you know, obviously the committee and council have breadth to override the policy, but it at least puts it back on everyone's radar and reminds them of what, again, the better or best practice would be. So carrying on to scope under section 4, page 15 is the start of scope. And really just a big list under 4.2 of some of the key where this does not apply. Council knows you have other policies for land and real estate acquisition. Facility and land rentals and leases often have, a separate approach. We often have to go into major contracts for BC Hydro, Fortis, etc. So generally that would be a bit complicated to go out and do some of this specifics of this policy. And again, these exclusions don't exclude staff from still doing some element of competitive bidding. It just doesn't require it to happen in the same, to the letter of this policy. Okay? So policing services, obviously, to renegotiate an RCMP contract would be a much bigger discussion point and approach to things. So this would not fall under the scope of this. Where there is some opportunity, so something where we were planning to purchase anyway, and we have an opportunity to go through a bankruptcy proceeding or something like that, where it's absolutely clear the value of that approach to picking up equipment or supply or something along that line, then the CFO and CAO would in turn be able to sign that off and approve that approach to a contract. Consultation, where there's significant technical infrastructure equipment replacement would be required to change service providers. So if we have a wastewater treatment plant and it requires certain parts or certain ideas, and to actually not use those parts would require that we make a major infrastructure change, that would probably fall under this. It's, you know, doesn't make sense to go out. Even if we went out and contracted, there's probably might only be one supplier. That's an area where we probably want to be very careful. That's one that could potentially get pushed a little bit, but that's again up to the senior staff to make sure that that's not occurring. Where we have warranties that specifically prescribe the type of equipment or use, and while during that warranty period we would use that supply. And again, in the original tenders and when we built that infrastructure, that should have been a consideration in terms of total ownership and total cost of ownership. Licenses, copyrights, and patents. So generally our training and conference, conventions, etc., we've taken that out of this policy and managed that from a senior organizational level, and the policies prescribing how staff can and can't do that. And our association dues publications, magazines, and newspapers, advertising mediums, so where we have to go out for notice, etc., we look for local newspapers. And there's some key prescribed criteria that we're always looking for. That is legislated, so we take that out. Our insurance providers, within reason, we actually do still shop around and look at insurance providers and cycle it from time to time, but again, insurance is one of those areas where we don't feel it falls within the key normal prescription. And our employee benefits, so, and again, I had staff give feedback on that one. And it doesn't preclude us from still shopping around with our employee benefits, but what it allows is that the agents working for us can also get us deals throughout the contracts and work to our benefit to improve those contracts when they're working for us. So we've left that one out. We do still actually look at employee benefits every, 4 or 5 years and make sure that we're getting the best benefit providing services. So we often or sometimes run into a situation where we can't get staff, and we sometimes have to contract in the interim to get the expertise we need in the building, so we've left that as an exclusion under the CEO's direction as to when that would fall in. And obviously the home computer purchases process where the staff that may not be authorized to go out and purchase their own computer and the municipality pays for it through and then gets reimbursed through a payment plan, we're taking that out of the scope because obviously they're unauthorized to begin with when they go and purchase it, but they're authorized by the employee computer purchase protocols.
All right, Christine, I've got a few questions under the scope section. Susan, and then
It's okay.
you're good?
Yeah.
Okay.
Actually, I'd like to go back to the previous section. You talked about the bid solicitation, and Susan brought up the car share. And that wasn't actually bid solicitation, but it does bring up an interesting point about so as I understand it, council said to staff, we want to explore this. Staff went out and called a whole bunch of them, and none of them expressed interest except one. So I'm just wondering how that type of situation may present itself under this bylaw.
So with ideally staff would have gone out and put an RFP up because probably the car share would be over our prescribed limits. But if it's not, then that would have satisfied us as long as they got formal codes back in. So if they put out, we always do our best. And there are times, frankly, council, where we will go out and we will actually call multiple suppliers. And they're busy, they don't want to respond. As long as staff document that, which we'll talk more about in 7.2, as long as they clearly document that they made that effort and we tried to solicit other providers, then they generally are on the right side of that. Where we get up past 75,000 and 200,000 in terms of construction contracts and services and goods, respectively, backwards, we're starting to run into treaties, and now they also need to do cross-Canada solicitation, or at least across Western Canada. So we look for them to also put out a BC bid call.
Thanks. On that, so my concern is that the car share comes to council, it's presented after staff has already phoned around, and the scope of the contract may change because of council's input. So I prefer that if a car share or whatever it is, you basically lose the innovation part of it and the opportunity to go out to RFP. If you want to go out for a car share, it should come to council, the idea should be approved, the scope of the idea should be approved, and then it should go out to RFP. When you're calling around and saying, will you do a car share, will you do a car share, and you get one solicitor and then you come to council and say this one person has said yes, that negates the entire RFP process. So I prefer.
That's what the policy is saying.
Yeah, exactly.
What you're saying is what the policy says.
But in that sort of instance, it's if it's under a certain amount or if staff's phoned around, I think that the policy sort of addresses that, but it needs to be really clear, the line of procurement, that the idea comes to council before phone calls have been made. And even if it's one vendor that's agreed to do it, if your scope has changed, you're not really going out to proper procurement, because if you decide to do a car share and council says this is a scope and this is what we're going to do, if you put it out there to the public or to vendors, it may come back a completely different thing. And it may have to come back to council, but it allows vendors to actually bid on what's the scope, what the actual scope is, as opposed, and the approval of, yes, we're going out to car share, now we're going to look at vendors, as opposed to, we're going out to car share, this is a vendor, is that okay? So the whole line of communication completely changes, the innovation changes through coming to conversation with the public, and then going out to scope of RFP. So I just want to make sure that that is in the policy correctly.
Do you want to?
I'm kind of looking to Chris, because it sounds like this might be specific to the car share.
Well, I'm
so
not
like-
sure we
No, I
want
don't
to go, I
think-
don't think
no,
we
it's
want
just
to
an
be
example.
specific to car. I think
Yeah.
Councillor Spell's using that as an example. I think
Mhm.
the idea is that if something comes forward and we've done telephone solicitation, but then as council touches
Expands
it expands the scope or changes the scope in terms of what we did on the phone and soliciting, then do we not have a duty through our policy to go back around and at least solicit again, or else do a full RFP if the scope has really changed past our purchasing limits that we've gone above?
So-
I think that is the concern here. It could be with anything. Councillor Schwell's just used car share.
Yes,
as an example.
exactly.
So I think what the policy speaks to, if I may, Chair, is that essentially whatever contract we think it is at the time and we put out on the street, that's bid and that's bid that way. If you were to expand that contract substantially, then you're correct. In theory, we have not gone out and done the competitive bid. At that point, we would probably need to look to council as to whether you wanted to expand that scope and we're prepared to single source that expansion, or whether you'd like us to go back to market.
So exactly what you said, but backwards. So I would like if there is something as large as a car share coming, I don't want any solicitation. I want the idea and the scope to come first, and then the contract to go back to staff to be like, okay, we are agreeing that a car share is a great idea for our community, and then we can look for vendors. Because if you preempt the idea and you've looked for vendors already, you're bringing the scope of a contract that you have with a single vendor already. If you want, utilizing the car share as an example, when you come with an idea, it should be that the scope is set by the community through council and then goes back to vendors. And it may be that, I just think that you're negating any innovation or possibility of expanded contracts, because after it comes to council, more car share vendors would have been like, oh, well, I
That's
didn't know
bigger
it
than
meant
I
that.
thought it was.
Yeah.
I think that's a valid concern, and I think anytime we think that the contract could be expanded or bigger, that's true. I think that probably, and I'll let Chris speak for himself, but I think probably in this case staff did think that council had an interest in car share, but I think your point is very valid. I think we do need to gauge what is it really we're RFPing and tendering for upfront, make sure that that's in line with the type of solicitation and bidding we did. I don't think this policy stops that from happening. I think it actually encourages that. After that, it's kind of going to be somewhat of a judgment call as to whether staff feel they had it flushed out with council or not. And at that point, I'm going to step out because not my bailiwick. Have fun, Chris.
I don't really want to dive into the car share, for example, at all. I don't want to spend time in this
But the
meeting doing
concept.
that. It's a concept, and I wonder if we can talk about it again when we get to the section on sole sourcing, because I believe that's where this conversation is more applicable. And what we capture in the purchasing policy might be different than a process which staff follow to bring us ideas.
Great.
That might fall inside the purchasing policy, but maybe we can put this one aside and speak to that other example when we get to sole source, because that's where I think council does have a lot of sensitivity in terms of making
I just
sure
didn't
it's-
want the confusion that that was a big process, because it definitely
wasn't.
wasn't.
No, it wasn't a big process.
Nice, might have been.
No, but it wasn't. But
So with that, I'm going to slide on then,
Yes,
with the
please.
chair's permission, and talk very briefly about some of the prohibitions on page 16. You can see section 5. Key one being that obviously staff can't divide up contracts to stay within the parameters and their own value systems. That would need to be that would be considered offside. Committing the district to a contract without the appropriate level of authority to do so. The award of a contract for an expenditure which is not included in the financial plan without CFO approval. And obviously, I put CFO approval there because there are times when it's an operating item and there are we try to leave management some room to be able to manage within their budgets, and I might be able to look at that and go, okay, that's not going to take us offside of the financial plan, it still fits within the context. If I don't, that will be the CFO escalating it back to you. So that's why I put the CFO there instead of council, because there are often things that we deal with within the building where I can say definitively, it's okay, it falls within the parameters, it's what we discussed with council, we're okay. And there's other times when I say, sorry, you're going to have to go back and ask council permission because you're stepping outside of what we talked about during financial plan, okay? The award of a contract that exceeds 5 years without council approval, so this is key in that we can't commit to liabilities outside of a 5-year term without some other escalated processes, and obviously we want to make sure that staff don't inadvertently step into that, because not every staff in the building necessarily keeps up on those forms of legislation. They don't look at it every day. The award of a contract that would give rise to a conflict of interest between authorized staff and a proponent. So this might be, we're a small community, things happen. So this one would just make sure that staff know they need to escalate that type of an award. The award of a contract that binds the district into any kind of financing agreement. So this includes leases, promissory notes, things along that nature where they're entering something they think is legitimate and a procurement, but the minute they sign a lease, they're actually introducing a financial instrument, and they actually don't have authority to do that under this policy. That needs to come back to, we have set people who can enter financial instruments, the mayor and myself, and our respective others that are particularly assigned and given that authority to do that.
I'm good.
You okay?
Yeah, I was gonna start talking about car sharing.
Thank you.
So number 6, exceptions to policy, the emergency procurement. So this is where we talked about earlier. If there were an emergency, then any 2 of the 3, and again, this would include their delegates under the delegation bylaws, but the CAO, CFO, and mayor. So any 2 of those 3 in an emergency situation. So ideally, we would normally like that to be the CAO and the mayor, but if the mayor was not available or acting was not available and we had an emergency situation. The follow-up on that, though, is that the CAO and or her delegate would have to come back to council by the next meeting to describe the emergency and why and what we did. Okay. Bid solicitation. So section 7 is where we really kind of get into the meat of what you can do, to what level, and what are you trying to achieve. So obviously that just again speaks to the principle of please competitive bid. We allow a direct award for under $5,000. This is in keeping. Council had previously indicated to staff, I think engineering had come in and asked for a little more leeway up to $4,000. We've just put this to the $5,000 level, and you'll see it's in line with our procurement or our purchasing delegation authorities as well. So 1 authorized staff based on professional judgment, so essentially they go out. Ideally, they're still looking for best value and they're calling a couple suppliers, but we don't look for any formal process of that, we just get the business done. Informal quotation from $5,000 to $25,000. 1 authorized staff based on professional judgment, but we do expect some informal quotation and we expect documented evidence of it. With the procurement, if the staff person's asked, they're expected to produce and show us that they had gone through and that they did properly attempt to make a quotation environment. 25 to 75,000 is an informal competitive bid. This requires more diligence around describing what it is we're purchasing, why we're purchasing, and specifically going out and soliciting and sending that to multiple. We also expect written responses back. And we would look at 2 people, a minimum of 2 staff people reviewing that to see what is best response back on that. Sometimes those things are very much price oriented. Sometimes there's other elements that we need to review, and that's really when we're looking for the 2 staff is to outline, is to really look at what is the best value in terms of what we're looking for, whether it's meeting what we're asking for. 75 to 100,000 for construction contracts. So this really, these values were determined by the New West Partnership Treaty Agreement, and it's anything from up to over $75,000 for goods and services has to be put on at least Western Canadian bid solicitation. We also have the, I'm sorry, I can't remember the new name of it, the Canadian replaced AIT. And it's totally escaping me this morning, I apologize. But we're also had an eye to that, but the New West Partnership was sort of the key one for us in terms of the dollar value minimums. And then 75 and higher for all contracts, excluding construction. We actually have to go to BC bid. So again, formal process out to BC bid, and over 200,000 for construction contracts. And then 7.3 through to about 7 just talk about some of the various types of contracting and what that looks like and how it falls in, and describe some of those table items a little more.
Christine, Can you talk about what ongoing reporting or controls we have to make sure that these policies aren't abused? Does our auditor look at these very closely? Do we have reporting that happens internally to make sure, because we have a decentralized system, what are we doing to make sure that people are actually meeting the bar?
Right now, I'm not going to lie, it's very difficult for us to track and comply. It's one of the reasons that we have asked for another FTE is so that we can start putting it into a system and tracking at least the larger dollar contracts and making sure that these are never exceeded. Particularly challenging for us are the construction multiple payment contracts. The departments send us a PO, and they generally send us a copy of that PO each time they send us an invoice, and they generally lay down for us what has already gone against that PO, so that's very helpful. Linda Klassen does an amazing job. She reviews all accounts payable going out the door, and she particularly pulls that contract, and the ones we've found so far has been through Linda's diligence and finding them and kind of going, wait a minute, I don't have the proper approvals for this. So, and we stop payment at that point. Frankly, that's too late because we have already engaged a supplier, and it's not really their fault that we didn't engage them properly. But as we move forward with a more fulsome procurement, that is sometimes some of the pain that comes with establishing strong procurement. So right now I would say we definitely struggle, and that's one of the reasons we're looking at Business World and fleshing out more of that procurement where we can actually track and maintain the POs, and the systems themselves will alert us that an invoice is going offside or is exceeding the PO tolerance. Sorry. Where are we here? Okay, I think that's, again, this 7.8 just talks about cooperative purchasing arrangements, and when we have those, that we don't need to do it again. We don't need to duplicate that if it's already been done by another agency. And again, then we talk specifically, a little bit of procedure here, frankly, but that's because it's decentralized, and when I pulled the old policy, I didn't want to leave everybody swinging with absolutely no direction as to what to do. So we do blend a little bit into procedure here in terms of how they have to deal with solicited bids, and what our expectation is for their communication to to bidders as they're going through the process, making it very, very clear what it is we're going to evaluate on, and having that documented and then going by that, so that if we were ever solicited through an FOI, or often major contractors do call back and say, hey, how come I didn't get that? We have the documentation and information we need to prove to them that we did adhere to our policies and procedures.
I've got a question for you.
Sorry, just going back to 5.1.4, contract exceeds 5 years without council approval. Is 5 years too long a term, considering election term is 4 years? And that's, as far as economic terms, 5 years is a lifetime. So would it be better to either make an election term or a 3-year contract? I'm just worried that if you award a contract for 5 years, it basically locks you into one vendor, whether they're doing a good or a bad job, and doesn't allow you to revisit the economy of the situation.
So, through Chair Elliott, the key thing with this policy is I want to make sure we don't step in it, frankly. Absolutely, it's up to the committee if they consider that too long and if they'd like that to be shorter. I do encourage you, though, to think about some of those broader contracts where it might not be at all appealing for another company to come and work with us because they've had to outlay considerable infrastructure or issues to deal with those contracts. So there is really a balance point here of, did we do it competitively? Were we fair? We were, at the time, that was the best contract, and that is probably the best way to get them on the hook to do it, because it's worth their time to tender and deal with us. So really, I'm kind of trying to look, frankly, for the minimum standards in this policy. We can revisit it more fulsomely.
Right.
In the
I
next
totally
process.
agree with you in the private sector, but we're not the private sector.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of community, in terms of community responsibility, I'm just thinking about 5 years as in municipal government, 5 years is an incredibly
It's a long time.
So maybe, and I know that even if you award a 2-year contract, it still may go over an election period. So I'm not really thinking of election term, but I think a 3-year contract is a substantial contract these days. And most people are moving to short-term contracts. Most vendors are even hiring short-term people to work with them. That's by 2020, most of our contracts are going to be short-term contracts. So I'd like to match that in our policy as well. I think 3 years is a better solicitation for a contract. I'm not sure. I'd like to hear the opinion of my fellow councillors, but I think 5 years is too long.
Peter, I've got Peter, Patty, and Doug. Is yours on this matter?
No, it's something else, but.
You want to also express an opinion on this one?
Not off the call.
Okay.
But just a quick question maybe to Chris. On our construction costs, contracts 100,000 and above, what's the contingency margins in there? For things like fuel increases and transportation increases, what kind of a margin do we have for scope creep on those things?
The way MMCD works, it's a fixed unit price on that sort of things. Things like fuel and that sort of thing wouldn't usually come up. Especially like in a one-year contract. If we did have a longer-term contract, then that would be built into the terms of the contract, and there'd be a CPI escalation or something like that, like we do with our landfill. We do have a change order section that I'm sure we'll get into as far as when things go sideways. We try to sign the PO and write the contract for sort of what a minimum amount, even if that's less than the budget, and the budget gives us that contingency. We don't want to give the impression to the contractor that we have all sorts of extra money in here for them to work with, right? So that's part of it. But yeah, we're usually working on an engineering 10 to 25% contingency on it. Construction, it really varies. If we have a lot of dewatering down by 3rd Avenue Pond, high. Other ones, very low contingency.
Okay, thanks.
Patty?
Yeah, I thought about this one too, and we don't have a lot of contracts that go over 3 years. Most of them are under 3 years. But we do have the odd one, integrated flood hazard management plan, the TTP. So I can see where that 5 is. You know, I would hate to have to break up those types of things. So I think, I hear the concern, you don't want to sort of get into something unnecessarily, but there are circumstances where I think 5 years is kind of an intuitive number. However, you know, things like the asphalt contract, you know, I wouldn't want that to go up to 5 years necessarily. So I don't know how we differentiate within the policy in terms of being more specific about, you know, maybe we say something like generally 3 or 4 years, but in special circumstances up to 5. I don't know, I'll pay for the language, but you know, generally speaking, we don't need this, but every once in a while there's a project that takes multiple years, and we don't want to necessarily trip over our policy, is what you're saying.
So I don't know if you want to go around the rest of the table, but for 5.1.4, perhaps what we could do is add a little bit of language just to indicate that the award of a contract that exceeds 5 years without council approval is prohibited. However, staff will always make an assessment of whether a shorter contract is more better meets the thought process of competitive bidding, or I'll find some better language. But would that sort of help cover that concept that council's expectation is that you generally won't try and take every contract for 5 years? Is that enough? Kind of, while you're mulling over the other question, maybe you can mull that.
The expectation that you can go up to 5 years, as opposed to saying that's the maximum that we consider, we prefer for the reasons outlined.
Okay.
So like just language that explains that or directs that.
I think that's exactly what we can say.
I've got Doug and Ted.
Thank you. I also noticed that, and first of all, I don't think it could ever be tied to council terms, because that's just almost an irrelevancy. If you think about it, if that was the case, then we couldn't enter into a contract today for more than 7 or 8 months. So I don't think we want to tie it to that. But the 5 years to me seemed appropriate in the municipal world, because that's a limit for a lot of other things. You know, beyond 5 years of borrowing, we have to go for public approval, for example, or beyond 5 years of leasing, we have to go out into the bigger world, and so it seemed to be an appropriate limit. And I agree with staff that there is a balance, because sometimes with these contracts, the gearing up to perform the contract is a significant cost to the bidder, and so it's not sort of as profitable for them and as meaningful for them if we say it's only a 3-year deal or a 2-year deal. They may need, and we may need the flexibility to go to 5 years to get the best deal for the community. So I was quite happy with 5 years, frankly.
Well, and to add to that, I mean, I agree with that 100%. We really want wording in there on contracts that say it's $200,000 a year for 3 years, but it's only $160,000 a year for 5 years. Sometimes if you draw the things out longer, you get a better deal.
It's very true.
You got enough guidance there, Christine, for that?
I'm not sure if I do, to be honest. I kind of heard different elements of, yes, we're happy with 5, but perhaps I can do something along the lines to satisfy the table, that we amend that section 5.1.4 to indicate, however, shorter terms should be considered where practical to promote the spirit of competitive bidding.
Thank you.
Does that
Great.
work?
Okay.
Do you
But
have that,
how about-
Melissa?
How about longer terms where savings can be made?
I would just ask that that come back to council for a call, because we will also have to go out for public assent processes, et cetera. So there's more legalities around it, and that's, again, this clause was intended for our decentralized staff to not step in it accidentally, not realizing that there's a legal parameter there they need to address.
Right. I think the general consensus is that wording would be helpful.
Okay, great.
Thank you. Okay, we got 12 more minutes. So let's-
Okay, I will blaze ahead. I think we're almost there anyway. Section 8 talks to preferred vendor lists and just outlines some of the parameters around how that would work. Again, we always find we get better value if we can and it's faster and easier, particularly for our public works operations areas where they might be calling an electrician every couple days or whatever, where we kind of set the parameters. We still get the competitive bid, but it allows them to pick up and be nimble and work quickly. So that's what the preferred vendors area is about. And then we get into the single source, which I think probably I'll get there right away, because I think if anything is going to prompt council's discussion, this might be it. So in single source, we would consider an emergency situation as defined under 6 for that. 6, yes. And for consulting services up to $25,000, where we're really looking for very specialized expertise. So there are times when we really are, we don't have the expertise in-house, or staff don't have that expertise. We know that there is key expertise out there, the best of breed, and so we try to leave a little bit of room for us to go and get those consultants within the $25,000 range. Where a service is a natural extension of a previous project. However, the key here is that we expect that was indicated in the original bid documents. So if we say we'd like to RFP this contract could extend into a broader contract and they've been notified of that, then that usually sets the parameters, gets us on the right side of the courts in terms of we gave them the opportunity, we indicated it would probably expand beyond that and that there was a good chance of that, and then they can decide to bid or not bid based on that opportunity for an increased scope. So that was one of those situations where we thought there might be some elements there as well. Once you get into it, it's particularly, I think housing is a prime example of this, right? You're kind of into it, you're not sure what it's going to look like yet coming out of the RFP, and then you come out of it and you realize all this expertise has been used, and you're kind of like, okay, now do we start from scratch again or do we carry on? As long as it's been outlined and clearly defined in the original, then we would suggest that might be a good opportunity for staff to come in and say, we single sourced this because it was an expansion of this original contract. And obviously, anytime it's outside of those 3, then it would have to come here for council approval.
So my comment on 9.1.4, where it just says with council approval, I actually think we should add the language you just said, where if it's outside of those 3, like, it just seems too broad. Like, council can decide at any time to sole source, because it doesn't qualify that language.
Council can decide to go into this.
But I think the bar should be high for council. I think there should be language in there that, it should, in extraordinary circumstances, or where, the 3 situations apply, but it's a larger dollar amount, or, we put all these structures and policies in place for staff, and then council can do whatever it wants. And that doesn't seem like transparent or fair.
Well, Chair Elliott, I think you know that you have an annoying CFO that would probably tell you were being not particularly risk adverse in that situation, but at the end of the day, it is a council call. So it's we're really looking at the policy to help staff not get on the wrong side of this. I'm absolutely open if council wants to put more restrictions on themselves, but as staff, I don't presume to put that on you.
Yeah, and I think there's a big difference between being an elected body and and being able to make decisions and go through a discussion on whether something's really good for the community or saves the community money or does something extraordinary for the community. I don't think a single person can do it, but as an elected body, you're making decisions for the community, which has been pointed out many times by Councillor Rice.
And Chair Elliott, if I just might remind that does not preclude the delegated authorities. So anything up to a set level would still have to come back to this table. So when we're talking about the, really value, real potential loss, come to, at this point, I'm hoping to encourage you to maximum $200,000 level. Anything over that has to come back here regardless. So I guess I'll just throw that on the table for considerations.
All right, let's move on.
Okay, so then 10 just talks about the award of contracts and all the things, again, a little bit procedural here where we require that the contracting authority or the authorized staff make sure that they've got all their ducks in a row when they go to award. Some of the key things obviously being the insurances that are required. We have referenced MIABC rather than prescribing this because they have an amazing grid, and so we're just referencing them back to that grid of what we consider to be a huge dollar risk and what isn't. Sometimes they don't believe that consulting contracts actually require insurance if they're low risk, and they have a very specific grid. It's actually a multiple page document, and I think it is probably a good standard to follow. So I've just referenced that. When we're trying, I think as the next phase of our procurement, we will try to go back and look at templates and contracts and things along that line. I haven't appended them right now. The old policy did have them appended. I've removed them for now because we didn't have an opportunity at this point to re-review them and make sure they're correct. However, as we do, we'll put those on the finance as a prescribed or preferred approach. We just make the language really clear here that staff need to use those as a first default. If they decide that that's not practical for what they're doing, then it's really up to them to make sure it's legally vetted or that they've gone back up through the officers of the corporation to make sure that it doesn't have to go out for further legal counsel. So sometimes it's a minor tweak, and between Robin and myself and Linda, we have enough expertise and length. We're not lawyers by any stretch, but we've had enough experience watching contracts and seeing contracts that we're like, that doesn't change the basic intent of what we're trying to do. We're okay with that. Other times we're like, hey, I'm not a lawyer, you need to go see Chris McMurdy or whatever. So this just kind of lays out for them what we want, that it is their responsibility. They need to be careful about it, and that's what that section indicates. Then we get into the very controversial change orders section. Essentially what we're saying here, and it's very important here in 11.1 that you understand the concept of revised contract value. When we talk about the revised contract value, we are now talking about the total cost of that contract with the change order, if it were to be applied. So authorized staff may issue change orders where the revised contract value does not exceed authorized staff's delegated authority, and where the contract will not exceed the expenditure for budget for the project or works as approved in the financial plan. For contracts awarded by council, so it had already been over their authority, authorized staff may issue change orders up to their respective delegated authority, not to exceed the total project budget outlined when they came and got you to award the contract, or as specifically approved by council at the time of the award. So council, there are often, and I'm sure Chris would love to talk to you about the times when we're going into a construction contract where frankly it is a time and material, and there is some risk as to what the time will be. And so we need to craft, and this is what we've talked about internally as staff, we need to craft that and make it clearer to council what it is they're actually approving in the award of that contract. Are they approving a specified dollar value, or was that just an estimate, so that we don't also get abused by our contractors and suppliers? And really, you need to be looking at the budget and the nature of that contract. So we would love some feedback from you on this, but this is kind of where we landed with, this seems reasonable without, again, we always walk that line of showing our hand too much to the contractors as well, particularly in time and hour contract or time and labor type oriented contracts. The other thing is any change order that substantively changes the defined intent and project. So we had intended to do a block of something, right? So we went out and we contracted, we were going to do this project from here to here. This, a substantive change on that would be on the fly, someone going, hey, you know, we got this other block down there, go do that too, right? That's outside the scope and intent of what council might have approved, so that would be considered offside and would need to come back. So anything that's substantive in terms of really exceeds the budget, so it inflates it ridiculously high, or the objectives of it, or the quality or time to a substantive level. And all contracts awarded by council resolution require the mayor and corporate officer signature for execution. It's just,
I've got a question from Doug.
Thank you, and I was glad to see this because this came out of a discussion we had a few months ago, I think, about construction project, I think it was in the Estates, one I'm thinking of at least. But my question is on this, and looking at that particular example, and I forget what the amount was, my memory says it was somewhere around $90,000, but I could be wrong, but let's just assume it was somewhere around $90,000. But the manager on site has the authority up to $25,000, and so he boots it up to his senior, who's a director, who has authority up to $50,000, who now boots it up to his senior, who's the general manager, who has authority up to $100,000, and theoretically could make the decision to extend that. But if it was $110,000, he in turn would have to boot it up to the CAO, who has authority up to $200,000. Is that the way it's intended to work?
yes, or you'd look at it and boot it straight up to the CAO because you know it's already over everybody else's limit.
Well, and I'm just taking the steps, but,
Yeah.
but obviously it would have to, but it could just kind of go up the ladder until you found somebody that had the authority to actually make the decision.
And then the implication here is the person with that authority, myself, Linda, Mr. Buxton, we're looking at and going, is this offside? Is this not within scope and the intent of this project? You've kind of got those levels of multiple people looking at it then. So it's not just somebody out in the field making a decision. You've now got that segregation of duty and that concept that two people had to step in and go, that's worth it. That makes sense for us. We think council will agree that that was a good choice in the moment.
So then, depending on who's making authority, that really, the area is $200,000. That's the range.
That is essentially the range. That is the potential.
Depending on who's prepared to make the decision.
Correct.
But it's-
And well, that's not necessarily true. If the
Within the
contract was
budget.
over 200,000 and got awarded by council, then it had to also be outlined in the RTC that that was a risk and a concern.
No, I appreciate it has to be within the budget, sure.
So council may decide to award that and talk to council about, or to staff about allowing that certain amount to a breadth within. But again, I would caution you as the CFO that try to stay within obviously your delegated authority bylaw, right? So if it doesn't have an exception to exceed 200,000, then you don't, right? You need to specifically speak to that, or we might need to amend the bylaws if you do that a lot. I don't think you're going to be doing that a lot, frankly. I think if you start to get up to a $200,000 overstep, something is not in line with this policy.
It's a good clue that we're something we want in the bidding process.
Now, granted, 100,000 is easier, and we're going to get there next, right?
Yeah. Doug, one last question.
Well, on a related point, because you mentioned, as long as it doesn't significantly affect the scope of the contract, of the original project. And I think perhaps we want to maybe flesh out the word significantly, because there's been examples I can think of where staff have gone and they had a little bit of room in the budget. And so they did something that really wasn't in there at all. We knew it was kind of consistent with goals of the community and council's goals, etc. And I'm thinking of there was a crossing in a bike lane or something over at the Smoke Glass Park was one example. They widened the culvert and so forth. And I think at the time, I think we felt that was a good example of innovation, and we thought that was very good. And so we don't want to I don't think we want to dampen that down. I think we want to encourage that, obviously within scopes. And so the word significantly might need a little bit of just fleshing out, but to not stifle the innovation part of it within obvious limits.
And I think the key there is the escalation. So under 25,000, innovation's great. Maybe council and everybody agrees. when it starts to get up, then maybe the three of us have a meeting and talk about whether we think it's still great or whether it's stepped offside. I mean, again, you're kind of looking for your management team to make sure that they're working within the spirit of this policy.
Ted?
And then just the other side of what Doug was saying there, if it was an oversight, if there's some oversight in the contract or something that's costing the district 100 grand,
Sitting idle, yeah.
does council get to know those oversights?
Yes, and to be honest, Council, I did have another provision in here. We just thought it would be very difficult without the systems in place to actually bring you that, but some stewardship or some follow-up on change orders. Right now, we don't really have the tools to do that effectively, so we pulled it out and have held it aside for now until we can get some tools that make that pretty slick and easy to do. But right now, it's kind of like it's an extra manual process we'd have to come up with in terms of coming back and advising you of change orders.
Most
Over a
likely
certain
the staff would bring that to us, I mean, if there was some kind of oversight where,
Well, like I said, right now, further to Chair Elliott's point earlier, we don't have the tools to flush that out quickly and efficiently enough to bring it to you. It would be actually an administrative burden right now to do that.
engineering firm who was advising us on the project screwed up, and it cost us an extra 200,000. Would we find out? No?
Well, you would by the 200,000 because we'd now be
One-
off
199.
199.
Yeah.
I think you'd have to look to Linda and I to decide that we need to come back and advise you of that after the fact. I'm looking to Linda, but that would certainly be my concern if we felt that it was really borderline.
Councillor Elliott, I think in a situation like that where, say, I mean, I don't know if contentious is the right word, but certainly I would put a filter on what council needs to be aware of in terms of what projects are out there, in terms of the public interest, what's going on.
We also, I think it always is the best practice, we're considering contractors who in the past have not been wholly upfront with their bids. Is that fair to say, Chris? And you guys do the bulk of the major procurement, but certainly I've seen other policies where we speak to actually allowing some room for suppliers to be disqualified from processes for a set amount of period if they have not performed well in past contracts. Like, again, I didn't put it in here right now because it's a little bit, probably requires more thought process around what that does and doesn't look like. And we really are trying to deal with an interim solution there, but again, we can take that back to our procurement more fulsome review as to whether there's some language we need to include on that.
I can just speak to that briefly. There's really the two sides. You mentioned the engineer makes a mistake, and the RFP process is best value, and that includes expertise and past performance, and that's part of the grid that's used to evaluate. So in that case, we do certainly consider past performance. When we do like a construction tender package, then we're really locked in to the lowest bid. And so right now, as it's written, we don't have a way to disqualify a vendor on that. We do have liquidated damages, and that the contract is the MMCD contract allows us to go after the best value for the taxpayer in that contract, but we don't have an ongoing process after the termination.
So I've got a question from Patty, and then I know we have guests here, and so we might need to just suspend this conversation, allow our guests to come forward to do the next item on the agenda, and then we can come back to this to pass the motion.
Whatever
if there's more
council's
discussion. So Patty, you've got a question?
Yeah, I appreciate the delegated authority, purchase authority. And we're increasing those a little bit, which I think is good. Where I start to have a challenge with those numbers is when we talk about scope creep, and I'm not sure I see enough language in this policy to really discourage scope creep on some things. And $200,000, even $100,000 on a contract can be a lot of scope creep depending on what's going on. So I get why we want to delegate purchasing authority to the CAO, CFO, and managers, etc. I'm not disputing that in and of themselves. this contract is worth $150,000, it doesn't have to come back to council, it's in the budget. But when you're looking at a $1 million or $2 million project, and there's scope creep that could technically happen up to $200,000 before it comes back to council, I'm trying to get my brain around that and whether or not policy is clear enough about discouraging that without due transparency and process.
Okay, so we did try and we play with percentages and everything. Percentages are really difficult. Like often you'll see in a procurement, it is X dollar value or X percentage of the contract. Maybe with the highest one, the ones where we've already come to you and there's something, maybe that makes some sense over 200,000, that 50% is sort of the borderline check. Below that, it's really hard because 10% of a $25,000 contract, maybe not a big deal. 10% of $1 million contract, pretty big deal. So I looked at council, it may be that you want to reframe the ones you award and put in a breadth, or if the contract exceeds X percentage. I just honestly couldn't come up with that magic number that worked in every circumstance. That's what I struggled with.
Okay, so I'm gonna let council
Mull
marinate.
that for a minute.
Mull that over a little bit. I want to go to our next agenda. I know this, respecting the fact that we have some guests here on this next item. Is there a staff person speaking to this, or are we?
Yeah, I believe Mr. Plum is going to come to the table as well, but I believe this is the correspondence one, correct?
Yeah, it's correspondence about the golf course. Councillor Riggs?
Yeah, thank you. And it's a golf course matter, and I'm not a golfer, but I am a member of the squash club, which is part of the same taxpaying unit. So I'll be sure.
Thank you. Scott, do you want to come up to the table? Sure. Yeah, why don't you join us? I expect there'll be questions. Have a seat there.
Both about it.
Jason, you come up.
So, Chair Elliott, we did believe this was a bit more of a council discussion at this point, but happily Mr. Rengie arrived to help fill in any of the gaps. We did figure there was probably some sensitivities around skiing on the golf course through the winter, so we thought they'd best to speak to it. And then Mr. Plum can speak about some of the lease agreements and things as questions come up. So unless you have something more formal thought to reveal, that's my take on it.
Yeah.
I just got a question.
Yeah, I'm just, I know that the tax exemption piece is sort of rolled into the whole lease agreement with the golf club, so I was just hoping Neil could outline that, because it's not quite as simple as we give them a tax exemption, because it is rolled into it, so I just wanted to maybe give that context before we...
Yeah, I can start with that, for sure. So,
and when it's up for renewal, I don't even know what's up for renewal.
yeah, so about a year and a half ago, or a year and change ago, Mr. Avey, the previous manager of the golf course, came in and did a presentation to council. Our lease with the golf course, it goes until 2029. It was a 20-year lease, but the way it was structured there was renegotiations every 5 years. And so at that about a year or so ago, the golf course, it's a high capital business, and they wanted to try and generate a little more certainty around what their future payments would be. So we sat down, and what we ended up negotiating was a new structure where golf course pays $1 for their lease, and that they would pay property taxes through the tax exemption process that would sort of land around $45,000 per year. And that was endorsed by council, the motion was passed, and so this is the first year we're working through that. So this year, the lease is $1, they've made an application for a tax exemption back in the fall, I believe it was, and that tax exemption was approved and is going through the process with the taxes being set this year with the tax roll. So for 2018, that's already been established, okay? What we have now is an interesting, suggestion by one of our citizens about, continuing to find ways to utilize more district property in more ways to the community, recognizing that in other communities, golf courses can be used for cross-country skiing and other uses in the wintertime. So Ms. Shepherd has sent in a letter requesting that be explored, and that perhaps the tax exemption be tied to to whether or not that can occur or not. That's a bit tricky because we have already, through these negotiations, arrived on a financial structure. I think what I was going to propose today is that it is an interesting concept. Scott has come back and provided some commentary on their concerns around the cross-country skiing happening at the golf course. I'd like Scott to have the opportunity to speak to that to council as well. But it might be that what we do next is, unless Scott is going to communicate to council that this is an absolute non-starter 100%, it cannot occur for financial reasons. We can explore that further to see if there's a way this can be set up in a fashion if the golf course's concerns can be mitigated. But that's something that we would go ahead and move forward on in the next few months and see what that looks like. And whether or not a solution can be addressed there. And it may be a solution that gets addressed through the community enhancement grant or through the budget process to be seen. But as Mayor suggested, ideally we've already reached an agreement on the permissive tax exemption around the lease structure. So I'm suggesting maybe we would visit this outside of that process, but through other processes that we have.
Council, any questions at this time?
There is going to be, you're going to speak to it though.
Scott, I think it would be a good opportunity over here.
Do you want to say a few words?
Yeah.
Sure, just quickly. Well, thank you for having myself and Jason here in the first place. I guess the main concern to us, I didn't speak to the permissive tax exemption itself. I spoke to the reasons why we don't encourage or don't really want skiing or the public wandering on greens during the winter. I think overall in the grand scheme of things, it's possibly not even that big an issue because usually our winters are not such that we have snow on the ground long enough to have a ski course out on the course anyway. What we do want to limit is when there is snow that people don't go out across the greens, as I stated in my email, because it can cause a lot of damage in a very quick amount of time. So really, I think you have to look at it in the whole scheme. Is there really a winter here at Squamish that warrants us sort of even addressing the issue of having trails out in the course for skiing on? That's really the main thing, which I didn't really mention in the email, but generally this year, last year, yes, last year there would have been. This year the snow was such that we would have had snow on the ground possibly for a couple of weeks that would have allowed skiing on there before it got crusty and whatever the case. However, the main reason is we do not want to look at it as not allowing people on the course. We just want to look at it as a matter of protecting our investment in the course.
Thanks. Patty?
Yeah, thanks, Scott. So I'm just reading the letter here, and I hear your point about the greens and the fairways even. What they're talking about is on the golf cart trails only, and I guess your challenge is how do you make sure people aren't holing across the green,
Correct,
for example?
correct. The trails are easily defined during the summer. You know where they are. Once winter is and there's snow there, then there is no trails unless we had staff that were going out there maintaining the trails for the public's use. And we don't have those sort of finances to ensure that would be the case, nor do we have the staff or the finances to ensure that the public are out there, but they wouldn't be going off the trails.
And if there was a way to not burden the golf course with this, to delineate the actual trails, would it be something that would be possible? Like if the Nordic group wants to go out and flag them or something.
I'm hesitant to just say yes straight off the bat. Jason, our superintendent, probably has some comments in regards to that.
We do random tours around the course just to double check what's going on, and once that happens, they are clearly marked, and it just doesn't seem to help. People just flock to the hills, which are all our most important parts. So you need somebody out there monitoring. I don't think we're in a position to make that happen.
Anything else, Council? Ted?
Well, I like the idea of seeing the winter use. If it's not going to apply, it's not going to apply. But I think it'd be interesting to talk to the group that is wanting to cross-country ski there and see if they have some ideas on how they could work together with you and maybe do something.
Arguably, if it was feasible, and I'm not saying that it is, but it would be a bonus to us, in some respects, because we would have people out there that, if there was no damage to the course, that would be visiting the restaurant for hot chocolates, etc. afterwards. So I see it as it could be a business opportunity if it was feasible, but I just don't see that it being the
Could
case.
be, but you say no, it won't work.
I just can't see it being a viable option with this winter that we have, with the snow that we have on the course, and the staffing and the cost.
I've got Patty, Susan, and Sherry.
Yeah, this has always been a challenging one for council, particularly as we started to wrap in the permissive tax exemption piece because of our policies about we don't give permissive tax exemption unless it's for the public. And so the golf course has always been a bit of a challenge because it's a public course, but it's not open to everybody. So now that we've wrapped it up in a permissive tax exemption, it rubs up against our own policies. So, I'm just trying to explain our challenge here because we're taking taxpayers' dollars and we have policy that says, you have to be open to the public. It can't be a membership-based thing. I mean, now we have this agreement that rubs up against our own policies. So trying to reconcile that, I kind of like where Councillor Pryor was going in terms of, is there a business opportunity? It'd be good to understand how much, we're just sort of speculating that this could be a costly thing, deterioration of the course through the winter because of people using it. Could be a costly thing, and we don't know that definitively, we're presuming it. And maybe there is a business opportunity, and I don't know, I just think, I don't want to just close, I understand I'm hearing your trepidation here, but we do have to figure out how we reconcile this agreement with the golf course and our policies on permissive tax exemption.
I've got Susan, Peter, Jason, Ted.
Thanks. I recognize that we're not probably a ski destination, which is also why, for the exact reasons I'm saying that it's only a little bit a year. I just wonder as well, because it's only a little bit a year, and it's probably only a few days you're actually good for cross-country skiing, if that actually makes it as harmful to the grass as it could be, and then what the rehabilitation would look like if you did allow skiers on the course. And I'm not thinking about delineating paths, but if you didn't delineate paths and allowed people to just go, people tend to go in the fresh snow, not in the tracks. So you're actually using a broader area instead of impacting snow onto the course. And I'd be curious, because we've never really opened it up, would it be harmful to try it for a season just to see how much damage it causes, if it can be mitigated, how many people use the course? We don't really know if that's even possible. And it would make the public pretty happy to have a place where, on a snowy day, they could go and enjoy. It's such a beautiful area to enjoy. And like you say, the business opportunity may actually counter the damage that it does by bringing in income to be able to pay for the damage. So I just think that it might be worth trying for a season and see if it does do horrendous damage, we can say sorry, and then you can show, look, this is the damage that did. But I'm just or delineate one path that is going to be damaged. You can actually put delineators so you don't have to monitor it and say you can ski in this area and this is the area that's easiest to mitigate. It seems wrong to say no skiing at all or skiing public access or no public access. There may be ways that you can actually gently ease in something or measure the damage so that the next year you can look at it, make better informed decisions in order to alleviate public concerns.
Yeah,
Okay,
I
so Scott, I'm
understand.
just going to hold you there because I want to get through all these
absolutely,
comments.
sure. Then I'll
and
answer
then
them together. Sure.
We'll let people weigh in. Peter, Jason, Ted, thanks.
Well, further to that, then I understand how hard it would be to police that and make sure that people actually stay on the paths if you don't have staff out there saying get off. And I'm just curious, you said that in the past you did have people ski across the greens and the fairways and there was damage from that. Can you assign a dollar figure to that and give us an idea of what it costs to fix something like that? So
It's not so much a dollar figure, it eats its way into our, so we're talking by the time June rolls around, we still see damage on our greens. They're that sensitive to this kind of stuff. So as you can imagine, when we're charging people $1 to play our course and they're getting to the 9th green and somebody is, and it's happened, we've had ski marks, and given the right conditions, it will kill the grass, and it's easily late May, early June before this stuff comes back. So I don't know if it's so much a dollar figure. We are out there, doing what we can, but it's a time thing, for sure.
Time is money.
Thanks, Peter. Jason, Ted?
I think this is a crazy idea. I don't know why we're even discussing it, to be honest. And maybe I'm a bit biased because my brother works in grounds maintenance at a golf course. But, I think it's too much of a risk. And it's true, people might not come back as often if they're not getting value for their dollar as far as conditions of the course and all of that. And, it goes beyond just aesthetics. It affects a lot more. So I totally respect the spirit of the idea that, maybe looking at other opportunities for public use. This is definitely not one of them, in my opinion. And I don't even think we should even explore it. Just, if it'd be one thing if we were, like the prairies where, it's 6 months of winter and the course is closed, okay, and you got a big snowpack or something, but we're not like that. So, and who knows, as far as more public use, I wonder if, I don't even know what you guys have right now, but, things like opening the course up on maybe non-peak days or something for low cost or free rounds for locals, or having some special locals days might be a good way to have outreach, provided that you can work it into the financial modeling and stuff like that. That's sort of my take on it.
Thanks, Jason. Ted, and then I'll insert my
It's totally worth talking about, but you want those ski grooves across the green to be right in line with the hole. When I think of it, I think of it more like,
Cut into the trail.
I picture, the trail might be able to get built all the way around the outside of that course, encroach a little bit on the trees, and potentially there could be a trap of that. And maybe only once a year when the snow conditions are perfect, there might be a race for some locals or something, So I wouldn't want, I'd like to talk to see a conversation with the Alpine group that would like to cross-country ski there, just to see.
That's basically what our course does, and the people that do manage to get on the course, they do stick to the outside. But sometimes I think the allure is just too much for some people to resist.
Oh yeah, and that might be what kills them.
And when we do encounter people out there, it's not a belligerent get that off our course. It's we don't encourage this, but if you're going to be out here, could you please just respect the property and stick to the. We're not out there deliberately kicking people off unless they are being completely disrespectful. So that's the way I see it anyways. And exactly what you just said is what happens. And with the snowpack, that's a big issue because I know Whistler does allow skiing on their courses, but they've got this giant snowpack. And we get 15 degrees and green to this much snow, and that's when people hit it, and that's when damage can occur. So.
Thank you, everyone. I'm not feeling compelled that this is a requirement in our community. Some beautiful trails right adjacent to the golf course. One of the reasons that the Nordic Club put their training facility down here is because we don't get snow. They want their athletes actually roller skiing down in Squamish, and then during the week, and on weekends they go up skiing at Callahan or Whistler, wherever. So, there's lots of places to put your skis on when it snows. It doesn't need to be the golf course. I think there's a conversation to be had about more public engagement in the golf course, but I don't think it needs to be around skiing. That could be one opportunity, but I don't think it needs to be the focus of a big effort. Because it's just not that wintry here. And a lot of people live here because it doesn't snow here most of the time. So unless a councillor wants to put a motion forward, I want to move on.
I have a question still about the letter though.
Okay.
I'm just wondering while you're here, there was a reference to use of pesticides. I wonder if you just outline what generally your practices are in terms of that.
I mean, everybody in the industry now is moving to as little as possible, and some of the products that are coming out are definitely moving towards reduced rates and more of a reactive approach as opposed to just putting it down just in case. Cost is a big thing. When we do spray, it's barely 2% of our property. We obey all our buffer zones, all our pesticide-free zones, and we're definitely not trying to waste anything. So it is a reactive policy that we do go by.
Is it Roundup?
No.
When you do
Please no.
use the pesticides, do you have to mark it with a little thing
Yes.
that says we use pesticides
Yeah.
here on a
Yeah.
certain date or whatever?
Yeah, we have a board that we read up with the treated area where that would be and what the product is, and that's the standard 24 hours.
Do you
Actually,
see,
48 hours, pardon me.
do you see it, the industry going completely green on this? Is that something that the industry's trying to
Definitely they would like to. Our climate does not,
We grow things well in our climate.
yeah, but we also,
Things we want, things we don't want, yeah.
sometimes we're very wet too, so it's a problem with a lot of these diseases that we are trying to prevent. And it's the desiccation that we're trying to get away from, and it affects our playability and keeps our people happy when everything is free and clear. But that being said, it is basically our greens that we spray, and that's about it.
Right.
and
Not fairways and stuff.
No, once a year we do a fairway out, and that's just putting them into, putting them to bed in the winter, so it's it's just cost too much.
Thank you, Steve.
Cheryl, I was wondering if Mr. Wendy could maybe just clarify around the membership issue as well. And perhaps I'll let him, but my understanding is there is membership, but there is also open access to both the golf course, the squash club, and the curling clubs for anyone in the community to join. It is user fee based, absolutely, but it is absolutely open to everyone, and I don't know if Mr. Wendy needs to elaborate on that.
You
And
just
also
elaborated.
a huge economic driver for the community. I can talk to many people from Vancouver who come to the golf course.
No one's debating that it's
No.
a big economic.
Anything you want to add to that? I think.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, like I stated in my email, the public makes up the most revenue for us over the year with golfing. We have a membership, sure, but that's only a small percentage of what our overall revenue is from the golfing side of things. We are trying to promote as much as possible to the membership to to the public, to make sure that they are aware, in fact, that the golf club is open to the public. It's been actually a battle of ours for the last few years. We keep on being written up in various publications as the best kept secret and things like that, which I absolutely despise. I don't want us to be a secret. So that's something that I and my staff will definitely be working on this year because, yeah, we absolutely want the public and we need them. Yeah.
Okay.
They're still saying it?
Oh yeah,
I remember articles from 20 years ago.
Absolutely, we've sort of used it. We've even used it as part of our marketing, which in the past, which I'm not a big fan of. And we still get people that come in and drop in on the way up from Whistler. And I didn't realise there was a golf course here, and so that's a big part of my list of things to be done there. That we make it more obvious that there is a golf course there and it's open to everyone.
The sign's not big enough.
Sorry?
The junior.
Yeah, the juice, exactly.
Whatever it is.
Good. Anything else, Councillor, or can we move on? We can move on.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, now we're actually not moving on, we're going backwards.
Thank you.
So thanks for
Thanks,
coming,
guys.
Jason Scott. So where we left off.
Well, I think we're almost at the policy, Chair Elliott, or
So yes, we were just, the mayor had asked a question about the difference between delegated authority to a certain dollar amount and scope creep, and whether those dollar amounts should be equal or the same. And Councillor Chappelle had a question about that, if you can remember.
Yeah, exactly. Scope creep. Yeah, okay, I remember what I was going to say. I am not as worried about the scope creep. I think our staff is fairly respectful about ensuring that the work that they get done is in the best and most efficient way to do the work, especially when it comes to engineering. When you're opening up a ditch and you're dealing with pipes, if you have to replace a pipe and it's going to cost more if you shut the ditch and have to redig it because you have to come to council or leave an open pit or whatever, I think that our staff are very respectful of that, and that the majority of our scope creep, or what we deem as scope creep, is different than, is different with municipalities when you're dealing with pipes and sewer as opposed to Scope Creek when it comes to other things. I don't see in our past that we've actually gone over, except in areas of engineering where we actually need to get work done that isn't for the benefit of the community.
Councillor Grace.
On my way.
Councillor Grace, Ted, and I'll go back to you.
Sorry, I had a few moments now to mull over Scope Creek. But I was thinking when the mayor was talking that it sort of goes back to the conversation I had with staff a minute ago, where if the scope significantly goes outside, and what is significant. And I can understand examples Councillor Chappelle just mentioned where you open up the ditch and all of a sudden there's stuff in there that you didn't really contemplate, but that's really part of the job, and so the cost goes up. And that to me is not a scope creep. That's just more
Common
money.
sense.
But there's also the examples I was thinking of where some things where you've got the equipment there, the contractor there, the truck there, the project's going well, it's on time, on budget, and there's room in the budget, and you take an opportunity to do something else that you think is in line with district objectives. And it was the example we went on when we were on the tour over by the Smoke West Park that made me think about that. And at the time, as I said, we all sort of praised it as being an example of innovation, which we thought was good. And so there's that fine line of where it might be outside of the scope of the project, but it is kind of in line with municipal goals, and it represents an opportunity. And so I think it's balancing that a little bit to get out of what might otherwise be called scope creep. It is scope creep. It's probably not part of the original project, but it's something that the money was there, the contractor was there, the cement truck was there, we just did it. It was the most efficient way to get it done. Good luck wording that.
Okay. Keep listening, We've got Ted and then
Yeah.
Patty again.
Well, my scope creep is where you hire an engineering firm and they come in and they say, this is what it's going to cost, and this is what the conditions are, and then you start digging and it's like, ooh, that's not what the conditions are, and it's going to cost twice that. That scope creep, I think, should come to council to say, a mistake by a firm was made and now we're just scope creep. That's the one that I worry about.
Well, can I just ask, is that a mistake, or is that just discovering something we weren't expecting?
I think that's a good question. And I think the definition of scope is really important too, and that's why we tried to wordsmith this a little bit. That an example we had was in the estates where we were replacing some sewer line, and it turned out we had to replace twice as much as we thought, and we're there. And technically that's a change in scope because the number of meters was the scope, but the intent of the project was to fix that section of the sewer main. And so in terms of sort of the public perception and council assigning dollars to go fix that, the intent didn't change, technically the scope had changed. I think we often do find different conditions when we open up the ground, for example, or we find underground infrastructure we didn't know was even there, or gas lines aren't where we thought they were. I don't see that as a change in scope, and that is we're really talking a lot here in this discussion about construction projects. We do use MMCD for those, and the risk and who takes on what aspects of risk are well defined in that. They are unit rate projects, and sometimes the units go up. Sometimes you need more meters of shoring, or you need more dewatering, or whatnot. So that's handled well by the contract, and the contract wouldn't have to change, and the tendering process wouldn't have to change, and it's all legal, and it's all within budget. It's just what were the expectations of council when they awarded, and that's really what we're looking at. As far as engineering errors from a contract engineer, I mean, those certainly happen. Not often. I'm not sure how to word something, how to trigger if the consulting engineer makes a mistake and it causes or misses something, forgets to look at something, however we're looking at it, and then there's an increase in construction cost due to that that we would then report. I'm not sure how to word that or what triggers. I mean, you never see everything as an engineer. You try to get it mostly right, and then you react in the field to the realities on the ground. So I'm not sure how to work within that gray area. Yes.
Do you have a follow-up?
Well, just, if it's an engineering fault, nothing to do with staff, nothing to do with the excavator operators, I just think if it's creeping into $100,000 or $200,000, council should know that that engineering firm didn't quite assess the situation properly. Only because we have a tendency sometimes to go with engineering firms because they're the most experienced and they didn't pass. And then, we might say, well, we'd like to move away from that engineering firm because it seems to me that's the third time that's happened. That kind of thing. And that's just a little safety gap, but I know, engineers, and I'm thinking of one project in particular that I probably shouldn't name it, but.
Okay, don't name it.
Yeah.
But I get your point, right? It's about making sure that we're not going back to the same contractors who are resulting in scope creep, I think is your concern. And that's the piece that I think Christine has been talking to about. The next big revision is about putting in place a more thorough purchasing policy and a reporting process so that we can stay on top of those things. Exactly.
Thank you, Chair.
That's kind of where I think we're going. Patty?
Yeah, I generally wasn't thinking of scope creep as what I think Susan and Ted outlined. I sort of saw that as those are just, we can't guess those things, and we build a contingency so that we can ideally deal with most of those things, and if we can't, we have some, well, I guess if it's outside the budget, we'd have to come up to council, period. So, I'm not too worried about that. I think where Councillor Pryor's going, and this is where we rely on staff, if there's a particular firm that continually sort of doesn't anticipate things well, then maybe we should go with that firm again, and that's I think that's a decision that internally staff need to sort of do their evaluation. My thought of scope creep was a little bit more along the lines of Councillor Ray's, and as you know, our budgets are so thin, and we're doing all sorts of projects. We're cutting all sorts of things that really we would love to do. And understanding, take opportunity to do things. But I guess I would like, I feel like the delegated authority in and of itself, I don't have a problem, but if that delegated authority is the same number for the amplitude or the scope creep on something, then even within budget, and I can't even think of circumstances where that might have happened, but I feel like we need some reference to scope creep and some definition, because we're obviously not always on the same page about what that may or may not be. And even if it's a sentence in the policy specifically referencing scope creep, might give me some, even acknowledging its existence, and maybe it's, delegated authority doesn't extend to scope creep, and we define scope creep. I don't know, I'm kind of throwing ideas out there now more than anything, but.
CAO, do you have something to add?
Yes, thanks, Carly. And this could be something that we talk about as staff in terms of the definition, but what I'm hearing is the definition really is anything outside the deliverables of the original RFP, the original tender, the original contract. So it's different work than was originally contemplated or attached on versus, we opened the trench and now it's, we need to do twice as much as we thought. And if, offline on the Christine to see if we can come up with something that articulates that.
And I think 11.3, to Chris's point, was the attempt at that substantive change in defined intent of the project. So if it was our intent to do a block, we would do a block, and maybe that has some additional costs and overruns, but we're still doing that block that we talked to council about doing and when we awarded. So I mean, I look to council, ideally this is an interim policy. It can be amended and corrected. If council's really uncomfortable with this, perhaps it is a clause that if the scope change exceeds the magic number, is it $100,000? We put it in the policy. If the scope creep exceeds $100,000 on that contract, we will bring it back to council. Or we have, it's just, the problem is we have had that instance where it did exceed 100,000 and it met what council was comfortable with. So it's tough giving those definitive, and I'm not sure you don't want, or hopefully trust Linda and I enough, maybe you make it Linda and I have to weigh in on that or something, that where we're looking at it and going, no, sorry, that's offside, this is, or maybe we pull in, the mayor and say, is this offside, are we okay with this? I just don't know how to specifically define it and meet both your criteria and your concerns.
I think for me, it's that the change order language is strong enough because we say you can't work outside the financial plan and the budget. That you have to, if council has been involved in the approval, then we get another say. I think for me, there's a difference between your purchasing policies and delegated authority and the reporting piece, so that makes council comfortable at the end of each year that we've spent our money wisely and that our policies are doing what we asked. And so I think for me, I'm comfortable with what we have in this policy, understanding that it's interim. But when it comes back, I want to be sure that we're matching the things we're delegating with proper reporting. So that if Ted does say, how many change orders did we have this year and what was the total, that we can produce that. If Patty said, well, I heard there was scope creep on this project, by quite a substantial amount, it would be very easy for us to report on that and why it was approved. So I think, to me, strong reporting, once we have those systems in place, helps to balance out the delegated authority. That's the comfort that will allow councils and this district, as it gets bigger and busier, to delegate more, because we've got really strong reporting on the other side. And those two things have to be married together, and I think that's what I want to see when this comes back as a more thorough policy, is that we can go, yep, we can delegate that, and we can delegate that level of scope change, because I know I'm going to get this report at the end of the year and go, hey, our staff are excellent, or hey, we need to pay more attention to this.
Understood, yeah, I absolutely agree with that concept, and like I say, right now we're challenged in that we don't put it in a system to easily capture it, but certainly if it gets escalated to Linda or I, we're in a position to indicate, oh, wait a minute, we better stop and at least have a verbal update with council as to something that we've change ordered, if that works in the interim, and then we can address it as part of the RFP. I mean, I'm writing the RFP right now for this purchasing review, and we can certainly put that on the how do we deal with this effectively. Again, putting it in business world will make a difference. We are looking at initially at only putting in some of the high-level construction contracts because I don't have any people to man the system. So we're really only looking at trying to make it practical for engineering, but beyond that, everything else, the POs won't be in there until I can get someone to run that and put them in.
So does council want to add a dollar amount to scope, or can we move forward?
Yeah, I think actually the way you were going with that was a good direction, defining the scope, the intent, and then when it's outside that, so what I'm talking about now is opportunity, innovation type of thing, and I think there's a limit to that, frankly. So, and if I had to toss out a number, I'd say $50,000, but I'll listen to other councillors. But beyond, and so that's something that was never part of the original deal. It's just, we happen to be here, we're mobilized, we've got all the trucks and everything, the machinery and everything, and and we're under budget, we can do this. So that's the kind of innovation I think we don't want to discourage, but there's obviously a cap on that, I think.
So I saw your hand, Ted. Could we put language in that any scope change or change order that requires the approval of the CFO or CAO triggers an update to council? Would people feel comfortable with that if we added that in this section?
Just a memo.
And just even a memo, but just an alert so that until we have the proper reporting in place, at least we know that if something's gone above that $100,000 to $200,000 level.
Well, it can't go under. talk to them.
So the only caveat, because I like that idea, thank you. My only caveat on that is I have the same authority as the GMs right now under this policy, so it may not come to me, it would go to a GM to Linda. So that, or we tweak the policy to require that approval for the two of us. That would be, it is a decentralized policy right now, so it literally goes up the ranks and I have the same authority as a GM, so.
I think she just pawned off the report onto you guys.
Yeah, yeah.
It would come from us anyway. I'm palming it off to Chris. Who's going to palm it off to Jesse.
But we are making sure it comes back to you, that's the key.
So that's all.
But just to be clear,
It's
like.
that level, it was the dollar amount I was trying to get.
Yeah,
to.
it's the intricacy of the policy, right? So if you'd like that, then we might have to also word this that something over X dollar value comes to Linda and I, period. If it's a change order and it's over 100,000, if that's the magic number, Linda and I would have to approve it. And then, if it comes to Linda or I, we would have to bring that change order forward.
Okay, I've got Ted and Patty.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't want to stop any.
Oh, sorry, Peter. Oh, Ted, Peter, Patty.
Sorry, I wouldn't want to stop any innovation. You know, so anybody that comes up with a good idea and wants to spend a little extra at the time, I applaud that. To Karen's point on tracking scope creep, that to me is, that pretty much would do it all, because then at the end of the year when we were looking at our budget, we could see how much scope creep there was, and if it was a lot in one area, then council could know if there was a problem. Right? I mean, I like what you said, so I'm okay with it, and 100,000 is a good limit.
Okay, Peter?
Just a question to Chris. I know you say when you put out the RFP, there's a certain level of expertise that you look at as well from these companies that have gone out, and you assume they're doing their due diligence, and I'm just using, say, opening up a trench for an example. But conversely, is there a database, whether it's provincially or municipally, that shows some of these companies that may not be so careful and may not be doing their due diligence, so you can kind of look at those and, you know, their reports back from different municipalities or whatever that say, you know, this particular vendor, it went FUBAR in this case or whatever, just so that there's some reference to some of those guys. Is there anything like that?
Not formally. Through the chair, we have, so for an RFP, we're talking a lot about engineering companies and their expertise and everything. So price is only a small proportion. We have a scoring system. The proposals come in, we pass them around to a panel of 3 staff who independently go through all the proposals and score them, and then we have a meeting to go through everything and to award. And as part of that process, we don't see a lot of vendors that we haven't used before to begin with. But also, as part of their process, they need to provide us with 5 examples of similar projects that they've done in the area, preferably in Squamish. And if we're not familiar with a vendor, then we'll pick up the phone, and municipalities are really good at talking to each other about their experiences and everything. In general, we know who the ones we like to work with and the ones who we have to watch. And that factors strongly into the decision. And the matrix is designed that way because, as Ted says, we could save $10,000 in engineering and have a $200,000 mistake out of it. So we really look at quality of engineering and expertise of the team, the specific team, all the resumes of the specific team members, not just the company, but who are working with, are part of that proposal for that reason.
Thanks. I just wanted to sort of define that expertise as to what it might look like. Thanks.
Absolutely.
Okay, Patty?
I'm trying to get my brain around what's been suggested. So, Councillor suggested $50,000 up to 50 of scope creep. Okay. Other people have suggested 100. Are we suggesting anything above 50 or 100, or wherever we land in terms of a report to council, requiring a report to council, or an update or some sort of update? Is that at 50 or is that at 100? And maybe the delegation's up to 100, but we want to hear about it if it's over 50. I don't know where the council wants to go on that. I'd like us to get our brains around what we call innovation, because for me, if someone's doing a project and then all of a sudden goes, oh, we're here, we have a little extra money, we can do this piece as well. I don't necessarily call that innovation, that might be responsiveness or something, I don't really call it innovation. But I guess my question is to the CFO, if we all of a sudden put a capital project that hasn't been articulated in that year's financial plan, would we not have to go back and amend the financial plan in some circumstances?
Yes, often that would be a case, and that's one of the things I would look at. That's why I generally ask, and generally from the staff get that. They do come and talk to me if they have a concern. So for instance, if facility is struggling with something and they end up, often with an emergency expenditure, a Miss Say actually comes to me before that, the spend, talks to me about it. We figure out where else she can buy that from, and we deal with that situation. So again, I think the delegation up the ranks allows the senior management team to weigh in. We don't like to be on the wrong side of it.
No, of course not.
we kind of worry about that relationship. We like it to be a trusty one.
Well, that's why we have this document.
That's right. So what we will tend to do is put that lens on it. Is this offside? Have we stepped beyond what we're supposed to be doing? The key is that this document is clear about that flush out. Before, it might not have been so clear. It was a bit gray, and we did have 1 or 2 occasions where staff took it upon themselves. You look back on it, looks like a great decision, but they probably took it upon themselves outside their delegated, authorized staff authority. And that's now what this policy changes and says, no, that would have to still be escalated. Even though it's time sensitive, it still has to come up the food chain. And, you know, someone has to sign off that actually has that political complexion.
And just on that, I know this came up last summer, I think on Government Road. And I don't want to get into specifics, but if there's a big project, we know near the beginning of the project, it's a 3 or 4 month project. There's time to come back to council, change the scope, to make an actual decision, particularly if it's a certain amount. But we know that at week 1, we wait till week 5, and then it becomes an emergency situation. We need to know now, make a decision now. So, and we've talked about this, like how do we make sure that we're not using the excuse as an emergency when we could have made that decision or brought that to, we really did have the time, but we kind of, whatever, for whatever reason. And I know there's no necessarily ill intention there, but we could get our mindset to doing that evaluation up front. Sometimes you can't, I understand that. Sometimes you can. So, I don't know how, we're not going to cover everything in this bylaw, I know. But it's a cultural thing, like how do we make sure that's part of the day-to-day goings on of the business?
And again, all I can assure you of is generally our culture is good. Generally, if it gets escalated, we are hearing the right answers and the right decisions. I'm not going to lie, some of it is a bit of leap of faith with council, and it could be that absolutely as we work in the business world, we bring back some reporting so you can check it and go, yep, you know what, they are following the policy. Beyond that, you are delegating, and if you're not comfortable with that delegating, then the next topic is something you need to seriously consider, I think. And I can certainly put in language specific to this around change orders into the policy that's under that delegated authority. If you'd like me to put in, whether it's 50,000, 100,000, we can do that. That's absolutely your discretion. Again, you just might run into that situation where 100,000 doesn't fix the pipe that is in the intent of the project.
Yeah. I think for me, we're so busy that 50,000 doesn't seem enough, and I wouldn't want reports and updates coming back to council unless it was at the $100,000 level. Like, I trust the staff and the system you've got set up here, and so for me, I think as an interim policy, it sounds like council wants some comfort that we get just to keep track of things until we have proper reporting. So I would say 100,000, and maybe if people disagree with that, they can make that known. If you agree, then I'll stay silent.
For both the delegated
Scope creep.
and scope creep.
Just on scope.
Or reporting.
Reporting and expenditure, 100,000. Because currently the policy says 200.
So
If I get an update, if the scope creep exceeded 100,000,
So
we wouldn't interfere with the delegated authority, but at least we would know about it. Is kind of the idea until we have proper reporting in place.
So I actually had a clause drafted, which I'm happy to slip in here if that's the intent you'd like to go with. We can look at update or a report to council for any change orders over 100,000. I'm looking to the CAO to make sure she's comfortable with this because it is a bit of an administrative stretch right now. We will have to go around because it's decentralized and the systems don't necessarily capture it yet. They will. But if that's agreeable to council, I think if that allows, it sort of is a nice blend between nimbleness, but make sure we're accountable for that nimbleness. I think it's a good resolution.
I got you, Susan. Patty, does that address your concern?
Partially. Yeah, I still have an issue with being able to go up to $200,000 on a scope of creep type scenario. I understand from just a delegated authority, yeah, CAO can say yes to this purchase of this machinery or this contract. But if we're talking about scope creep, I feel like $200,000 is a lot of money, and that it's a little high for the scope creep side of the delegated authority.
So Chair
That's a
Elliott, I
big
think
scope
for us, we're struggling with how do we ensure we define that, what scope creep means. So I just had, for instance, Mr. Wickham say to me, oh, but they're just talking about when it's substantial change, right? And I'm not sure I'm hearing that. I'm hearing it's over 100,000, you want to know about it, or you want us to stop and come back. So I do need a bit more clarity to draft what you'd like. Absolutely. Your call, I just need to understand what it is we're editing here.
Okay, on this topic, Susan, Doug, Ted.
Thanks. I don't mind $200,000 when it has to do with engineering. Maybe we can put an exemption for engineering projects, because that is where you get pipes in the ground and you need to make immediate decisions. And with other areas, there's time that you can come back if there's high, which, you know, $200,000 would be high if I thought about it being in IT, or like this is a really innovative project. I think it's innovative, so therefore I'm going to go and spend money. That I consider more of a scope creep. So maybe we can exempt engineering from the policy. I don't know if you can exempt a department or if it has to be a broader thing. I don't mind it being left at 200,000. But also with innovation, you need to budget for innovation. Innovation isn't something that happens out on the field. It's not like I have a great idea, I'm going to implement it right away because I think it's innovative. I think innovation has to be budgeted for. So,
yeah. Okay,
Can I clarify what I was trying to say?
clarify, and then I've got Doug and Ted.
When I was speaking of scope creep, I wasn't talking about projects you open the ground up, it's more complicated, it's going to cost more, it's in the budget. And I think that that's all about defining what scope creep is, really clearly. So the intent of the project, I don't mind going up to $200,000, I don't want that to come back to council, the report might be nice. It's more when it's completely outside of the intent of what the tender was, or the project was, that I'm thinking 200's a lot. That's a big project. So I just wanted to define, I'm not talking about what you're talking about, I agree, $200,000 on that type of thing, no problem.
Okay. Doug, Ted.
Yeah, so looking at section 11, 11.1 and 11.2 talks about authorized staff issuing change orders, not going outside the total budget. The revised contract will never exceed that without coming back to council. So it's things where we're talking about maybe more pipe than anticipated. We open it up, we find there's more rotten stuff, etc. The examples given. So I think that one's fine, and I'm happy with that one going to 11.2. But the scope creep one is 11.3. Any change order that will result in a substantive change in defined intent of the project budgeted. So I think that's the change. And substantive change in the last line of that means a change in budget, objectives, quality, or timeline. So in other words, now it's maybe something that wasn't even in the original thought. It's the opportunity I was just talking about, because everything's there and we can do it. So that one I think is the one that, speaking for myself, that I think we put the $100,000 cap on, but not the first two. First two I was fine with the 200. That's the one I think where now we're talking, call it opportunity, innovation, however you want to frame it. But that's the one that's just something completely new, and there's a limit to that. And I guess we thought was $100,000. So I guess, the only other thing I can put into there is whatever new direction goes, this doesn't come out of the blue. It's maybe something, the verbiage in line with council priorities or objectives generally, something of that nature. So it's not something that's just completely at staff's whim, but it's in line with active transportation goals or whatever.
Thank you, Doug, that was helpful. Ted?
Yeah, same. After hearing Karen talk about us tracking scope creep, I'm okay. If the limit's 200,000, I'm okay, because if we get a report once a year that shows all the projects that creeped, and this is how much was spent, I mean, if we run into problems, we can change it then. And so if we're tracking it, that to me is huge.
Well, I think we'll eventually be tracking, which is why we're having this conversation, to put something in the interim.
We could potentially, in a very manual way, bring you back change orders exceeding a certain dollar value. As long as it's a fairly high dollar value, we could put a mechanism in place to catch that manually. For the time being, it will be easier when we have business world in place in a more fulsome way.
Well, that's it, that makes everything open, and that's my concern with it all.
Yeah.
We know about it.
So Christine, do you have some wording for 11.3 that?
I think, I don't know how perfect it is, but if council's okay with the intent of it, then I think so 11.3, any change order that will result in a substantive change in defined intent of the project, budgeted or that will result in a revised contract value exceeding delegated authority, or that may exceed the project budget allocated in the financial plan will require council approval. So perhaps contract value exceeding 100,000, we change out there. Would that revised contract value exceeding 100,000? Is that, am I understanding that correctly?
I think it's the change will exceed 100,000, not the contract
Oh, yes,
value.
okay, I'm sorry. So I had originally penned in will require council approvals. We could then add if in excess of a $100,000 total change order. Total of all change orders, because sometimes the change orders come piecemeal
Incrementally.
too, so.
Okay.
Is that closer?
That's
Sorry.
closer, I think.
Trying to fly on the fly here, so.
Can we move on from that one, council, if people are
Yeah.
comfortable with
I'm
that?
okay.
Yeah.
So I'm just reading the change order definition again. Doug just read it. Originally contracted scope. So the change order encompasses change in scope. Definition. I'm talking about the definitions now.
In the definition section, yeah.
So change order is implying change in scope. So there's sort of an embedded scope creep within change order.
It is difficult to define, especially when you get into time and labor contracts, because we might go out and originally put a PO with the group that says, hey, you know what, you've got authorization up to 400,000, then you got to come back to us. It doesn't necessarily change the intent of the project, but it obviously is over what we first issued the PO to that company for, right? Because we want them to check back with us if they're going to exceed that minimum level. The budget may be 500,000 or 600,000, so we have to kind of revisit. So it may be that the language for change order isn't quite there, but that's when we're talking change order there. Maybe I do need to look at the language, because it is basically when we're changing those contract values.
And
That's how we've
I'm
written
just-
11.
Do we define scope? I don't see a definition for scope.
But they're asking to change, the number 11.3 actually talks to the innovation piece and where they are potentially taking it outside the deliverable of the original contract. So that's why we're having so much trouble here, is that actually we've expanded change order to include innovation and that extra little bit, because we're there in a strategic priority and we could potentially do it. So that's why we're getting complicated here.
Yeah, so
It is a problem for.
I guess where I'm trying to go with this is maybe we redefine change order so it's very specific.
Okay.
And maybe we don't actually define scope in our definitions. Perhaps we should define scope, if possible, and maybe we should define scope creep and reference it specifically. just because we do speak to scope within the definition of change order, so it gets really complicated about what you're meaning.
Yeah, no, I can see that there's a bit of a disconnect for sure. We want a definition for scope. You might want to revise the definition under 2.6.
And maybe it's not contracted scope, maybe it's contracted amount or a project or something. Or, I don't know, I just feel like if you're gonna talk about scope here and then we just talked about, well, we're encompassing this under scope and this under scope and we're talking about scope creep and we're mostly just talking about this, so it gets all muddy. Any suggestions on that?
So,
And the only suggestion I came up with is we define scope creep, and then we make sure that within our policies we're being clear about what we need.
And so what would you like, where's the 100,000 come in? Is that scope creep? We
Yes.
actually are allowed to scope creep up to 100,000?
Yes.
Yes.
that has generally been council consensus, that up to that point, we don't need an update. We expect that staff are using their professional judgment to manage that. When it exceeds that, it comes back for a report.
So my only concern with that will be if that's defined for all of the options or just 11.3.
It's 11.3.
Again, because it exceeds 75,000, which is the newest partnership treaty agreement, so we've got to be a little bit careful about that. And we also want to make sure that we're not contracting outside of what we originally competitive bid. We don't want to open ourselves up to legal challenge. So with those thoughts in mind, that's one of the reasons we try to be careful with expanding. Even though we like innovation and everything, we do need to be a little bit careful with how much we open that to staff to.
So, in a way, we may be making this more complicated than it needs to be.
Possibly.
At the end of the day, council wants to be sure that what we signed, what we contracted for, is what gets delivered. And if it's exceeding that, we're changing the intent of the contract, we need to be
come
aware.
back.
And maybe there's no dollar figure on that. Maybe, we just leave it as it's worded, which is requires council approval. If you're changing the intent of the contract, if we may be offside because of treaties, and then maybe the number is, there is no number. It's just, if you change the intent of the contract, we need to know about it. Until we have better procedures and reporting in place to monitor that kind of thing. So maybe we just keep it really simple and say, if you're changing the intent, as it's worded here in 11.3,
It comes back to council.
It comes back to council.
Call it a day for now until we get some other parameters.
Yeah.
And we can revisit it and see how to make it more practical through the purchasing review.
Right. So let's just, if it changes the intent, it comes back to us for the interim policy. And we don't put a dollar amount, we just say.
It's probably more comfortable for staff.
Then we get to exercise our discretion, and we don't leave it up to staff solely to exercise their discretion until we have a more fulsome policy in place. Because I think the concern is, where's the line? And do we have enough comfort with where that line is? So maybe the interim policy gives us a chance to test where that is for all of us. And what falls within that and what doesn't. Because right now we're even having trouble giving examples about what it might be. So I'd rather keep the language.
I have examples, I just don't want to say.
So I'm going to go over to the CAO, and then I would kind of like to finish this presentation and try and get this done.
Thank you, Chair Elliott. Yeah, I think where council has landed makes me feel more comfortable because trying to speculate on that dollar amount is difficult. And in terms of building that trust with council and going forward and having more examples and more definition will, I think, allow both sides to improve it. And then the other is I feel like if we had gone with the 100,000, we're about to step into the policy bylaw contradiction that was happening before.
Yep.
It was a different amount. So yeah, I'm comfortable with that.
Great. So let's strengthen our definitions where we need to in the definition section. I think.
Would we
makes
need
sense.
to in that case? I'm just wondering if we would.
Let's do it anyway.
Do it anyway? Okay. So with that in mind, then, I think we're just down to roles and responsibilities. And just to clarify, because it's a decentralized policy, it basically comes down to the CAO to administer, whereas if you had a centralized procurement, often you'd see that being delegated to the CFO, who that person reports to. However, the financial officer maintains policies and procedures. We have decentralized, so the managers are responsible for the things laid out in this policy and making sure they're contracting appropriately, and that's essentially that. And then we go into a number of references, the key one obviously being some of the MIA and some of the treaty agreements. The other aspect that we wanted to talk to was council's comfort level with bringing back a bylaw amendment. One of the reasons this is timely is we are setting up the business world structure right now, and we're trying to set all the workflows. It's a fairly substantial process, so if council's comfortable going here, it's preferable to do that now while we're building all the workflows for the system. What we are looking to increase the limits to allow a little more of that nimbleness, flexibility, and ability to react in situations that we had just spent a lot of time discussing. So council is requesting that we look at the following changes. This includes also the discrepancy in the prior policy where we were silent on the senior director role. We're asking that be aligned with the GM structure as part of the core leadership team. That allows the workflows to work more, they're more seamless. They work really logically then, frankly. And so those are the proposed updates. If council is comfortable with those, we would bring back a bylaw to another day, to a council meeting, a formal council meeting for the meetings.
Patty?
How do these compare with other municipalities?
It was all over the map. A lot of municipalities, once they reach a certain size, don't bring awards to council, but they often have centralized purchasing. I believe that Whistler was like $1 million. Sorry, it's been a while since
Do they have centralized purchasing there?
They have a little bit. It ranged anywhere from about 250 upwards, so we're still probably a little shy of most municipalities where we don't have a centralized department, but it is, I think it's pretty viable in the range of the ones that I researched out, anywhere up the Sea to Sky corridor, or anyone that didn't have some purchasing. Even Courtney has about the same population as, they have an agent, they have one purchasing agent, and their authorities are higher.
And I think,
Do you want me to go to Doug? Doug?
Yeah, I was happy with it.
Yeah, okay. I'm happy with this. I think this is a right next step. And then as we develop the work process and policy further, we can, and get that FTE, we can look at changing it again. Anybody else? Patty?
Yeah, I think this is generally, we were probably too low before. I was worried about going too high in the absence of the centralized purchasing, but that's our goal, so. I almost feel like just putting it on all directors, it's really much more individually based. For example, Camilla has, I think, a purchasing now $20,000, she can do anything with money. And she may have a whole lot of more things she could spend money on than another director. So it's almost like, I know it's hard to name people, but there may be the odd instance whereby a particular person we may want to say, like the facilities manager, I took that as an example, you actually want to.
We certainly can through the chair if there's any particular role that you wanted indicated, we certainly can do that. We are trying to keep our workflows as uncomplicated as possible, but absolutely, if it makes sense for a facilities manager or a capital engineer to have more, then this is where we need to put it in this bylaw.
Ted?
You just go to the boss. So if your limit's 20,000 on there because you're a director, you go to your boss. That seems pretty simple to me.
Just great. I think until we have the back office, I'd rather keep it simple. And if we're going to look at our purchasing more fulsomely and possibly move towards centralization, I'd rather keep this very simple this time. So I'm comfortable with this. Anybody else? Okay. So Is that it, Christine? Because I know
I'm
motion's
sorry,
sitting
I
on-
won't go through this piece because we've already talked about what we're doing next. I just did want to touch base as to what council would like their role in that to be. Would you like our facilitator to come in and spend a little bit of time with council just finding out what you like, or would you like us to just deal with it back house?
You
and
might
bring
go
it back?
to the previous slide, so we
Bring
have
it back to
context for the
recommendations.
questions.
Sorry, this is if we had we're going to bring in a facilitator or a procurement expert in 2018 to look at business process and review. I just wanted to touch base and see if you want to give me some feedback now and I'll just take it back to them, or is that sufficient for us to work out and then just bring some recommendations forward when we're done the process internally? I just want to make sure I'm on the right side of how involved council would like to be in this process.
I would think, based on the conversation today that was supposed to take an hour and is staying closer to 2, that council would like to sit down with this person and ask questions and understand what best practices look like and where an organization of our size and budget should be looking at establishing boundaries. So, you know, if anyone disagrees with that, then let's talk about it. But I sort of think this council wants to be quite careful on this. So.
Well, and one of the things that was talked about was the potential for savings. So I think we really want to be today be cognizant of those potential.
Yeah. So there's both the environmental and social and economic piece of this whole purchasing thing that I think council would like to weigh in. So,
Okay.
Great.
So.
Will this all be done by September?
We are trying to do the RFP now. We certainly could have them in to talk to council ahead of September. That would not be a concern. Whether or not we have all the recommendations and everything back to council by September, it will have to be fairly close to then, because the goal is to see the role and define the role of potentially another FTE. That we'd want to make sure that was hard before we
Okay. We had 3 motions in front of us. So one is to repeal the old purchasing policy. The second one is to adopt the new draft that we talked about today. And the third is to prepare this delegated authority by law.
We can't repeal this until we have a new one.
That's right. That is correct.
Cannot do.
Yeah, agreed. So if you'd like us to bring this now back, is it close enough that we can make these tweaks, bring it to council, get it approved in council, then we can bring it back with the bylaw? Is that more comfortable for council?
I think so.
All right, so perhaps just directing us to bring it forward to council with some edits and that we're basically on side with the purchasing authority is sufficient then at this point, and we'll take it away and finish it off.
I don't know. We need to motion for it.
Just do it? Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
So they'll both come back to us at a regular council meeting, the policy and the delegation and bylaw.
Sounds great.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, council. That was good this time.
Thanks.
So next up is item 3, which is the medical services plan. So the provincial government made some policy changes regarding MSP, and this has had an impact on municipalities. So Anushka's here to give us an update on what that might look like here.
Yes. Good morning, Kennedy. Anushka Riveran, financial analyst. I'll try to make this quick. It should be quick. You've received a letter from Maple Ridge. It's pretty hard for me to comment on the numbers. I've made some estimate, but I'm not sure. Again, I'm here to give you some information on the changes and maybe the effect on Squamish. So if we go back to the fall, the government made an announcement that the MSP would be cut in half. Everybody was happy, and if we come back to the 2018 budget announcement, we decided to keep that 50% of MSP until the end of the program on January 1st, 2020. But in 2019, which is next year, they're going to add the employer's health tax of 1.95% of your payroll. So that means that next year, employers are going to pay, well, the employers that are paying for MSP will pay for MSP at 50% and the employer's health tax. So what that means for Squamish, trying to get to the next slide, is we're currently paying, in 2017, we've paid about $237,000 in MSP premiums. This year we're forecasting about 120 grand and 440 for 2019. I'd rather look at it almost like if we don't have the 50% reduction and like the full cost in 2018. So that means,
I'm just teasing. I said, don't breathe, it's flickering.
it's like, I'm pressed on time. Let's say we look at 2017 over 2020. That means it's about an increase of 75 grand and 30% in LCAST for the district.
So I think a key thing for you to understand, Council, is there is a little bit of a pressure in 2018. So if we know this is becoming a bit of a political question, that's one of the reasons we wanted to bring it in to you today to give you some indication. It seems to us that last year they did actually reduce MSP. We have a little bit of room to work with that in 2018, or like in going into 2019, because we didn't necessarily get the budgets down with what they actually were going to rate us with. So we're kind of okay for 2018, and we will even be able to kind of run from 2017 to 2019 will be your true real impact for us from a budget taxation perspective. So it's about 1%, if I'm reading that correctly. So it is significant in that 1 year because we're kind of getting a double whammy, right? So we're still paying the MSP employer portion, and they're giving us the tax. So it's not one or the other. By the time we get to 2020, they're giving us the tax and not the MSP portion. So it's kind of just that perfect storm in 2019 that is probably the political concern. Once we get to 2020, what council probably needs to be most concerned about is how much of the market MSP are we having to absorb for employers that are smaller than us? Because right now it should effectively just change. Right now we play the employer and employee portion. And right now if they just replace that with a tax for our organization, probably the smoke would clear, we'd be even. So I think the residual is that we're actually also having to pick up employers that are below the threshold. And the larger employers are having to absorb that. So that's a minor concern, but for us it's about a $75,000 hit. The 2019 is the problem because we're doing both, paying both as far as we understand it today, we'd be paying both the tax and the employer portion of MSP. And that's why you're seeing the spike in 2019. Clear as mud?
Clear as mud. I'm curious why they wouldn't have aligned the tax with when the MSP was. Like, why would they create a situation where they're going to double tax municipalities?
And I think that's the lobbying that we're probably looking for the political tables to do, is to talk about if they can transition 2019 better. I don't know that it's, I think philosophically across the province, not necessarily a bad approach to get to the EHT. However, I mean, I understand economic drivers and small business and all that, but I think the kicker is, why are we kind of getting penalized in the transition? Could the province pick up more of that for that year? It's their initiative, let them eat it, and then move us to a new philosophy.
How do you like that?
Yeah, I generally think this is the right way to go. I think Ontario went to a more employer's health tax 25 plus years ago, and I think most, even Alberta, I think is there too now. So we're behind the times in that regard. We're behind the times globally. In terms of the OECD, Canada pays very little for your health tax compared to other places. I think we're fourth from the bottom of the OECD. Anyway, so I generally like the direction that the government's taking in terms of the tax. And it seems to me, small business, and I don't know, I can't speak to specifics, but my understanding is small businesses get other tax breaks elsewhere. So this can even out for them in some way, particularly some of the Liberal policies gave them tax breaks. So, but for municipalities that don't get those other tax breaks per se, this is where we get the hit in this 1 year. And so I just think it's important that we're clear about we don't necessarily have a problem with transitioning from MSP to the employer's health tax, but that it's really hard in municipal budgets to have this kind of spike because of this overlay that they've done. I just want to make sure that that's what we're articulating, and I'm not sure the letter from the mayor of Maple Ridge does that. It was more just like, you're hitting us, we don't like it. Maybe I read between the lines a little bit, but I think we want to be clear about municipalities need a special consideration in this particular scheme because we are the ones sort of being hit with this 50% extra in the transition year.
It's a provincial policy that makes a lot of sense, but we're kind of it's downloaded to us in 2019 instead of transitioning it and helping us get there.
Okay, Ted, then Jason.
So when you write the letter to all the other mayors in the province, you will articulate that a little better than what Maple Ridge did?
If council wants me to write a
We
letter.
need a motion for that, Ted.
Well,
We haven't put a motion
I mean,
on
that
the floor.
seems to be our next step, right?
Well, and I think particularly bringing this issue to the, in a more clearly articulate form to the provincial government with a solution, perhaps.
So through the
And we
chair,
can see
we brought it because we heard it on CBC.
Yeah.
And we knew that probably it would be discussions amongst the political forums. We wanted to make sure you had enough information to be conversant in that. Because we are hearing some really, I mean, Kamloops, I think they touted some really large number, which kind of had me running into Anushka's office going, can you analyze this? Because that sounds ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
And then we find out, well, it's not insurmountable for all the good reasons that you indicate. There is philosophy to go here. It's that bridge year that I'm really struggling with why we're eating the bridge year.
Yeah.
Jason?
I'm just wondering, for the 2018 year, given that we did our budget, I think you alluded to it earlier in the presentation, what do we have as a residual or carry forward because of the 2018 reduced amount? Do we know
Well,
that number?
I think look at the 2017, or do you have a better figure for them right now?
Do you mean of what we,
Like, would it be around $110,000 or
that we
116,000?
budgeted in 2018? We budgeted the full amount in 2018 because the announcement was late in the fall. So there was no time for us, like the way we budget salaries and benefits, like there was no time for us to like go through like that entire process again.
So we budgeted 233.7.
To like a little more than that, yeah.
So to me, I mean, maybe one way to go would we not be able to carry forward that residual, and then in the 2019 year, that would almost wipe out the MSP portion.
We agree, and that's
Yeah.
why we're saying look at 2017 to 2019 because that's really your impact. We still think that's a significant impact. That's like, a pretty good tax hit on our community. So, if you're going to lobby, that would be what we'd lobby is please for 2019, can you find a way to reduce that back to so that we're paying more along the lines of 2020? We have, to Councillor Blackman-Wool's point, we absolutely can carry a little bit to cover off that and kind of get us back on the right track. So that's not a problem. Our budgets will sustain us through to 2020, I think, but it's just that blip.
Yeah.
We could work with an accumulated surplus, we absolutely could, but again, not all communities maybe were in that situation that budget later and aren't passing their bylaw till May. Maybe they didn't, maybe they are really going from there all the way up. And so I think from a political perspective, it is a concern.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with the policy, the overarching policy of getting rid of the MSP premiums. And when you look at 2017 of 237,000 to 2020 at the end of the day, 326,000. So, in the long term, it looks like we're going to be paying about $90,000 more per year, as the mayor says, for those businesses that are exempt, or you said perhaps. And I'm kind of fine with that. The hiccup obviously is the 440. But if you average them out between 2018 and 2019, it's not that bad. And we average out other things. And so for me, the only decision, I'm not even sure I'd worry about lobbying about 2019. I just wouldn't worry about it. The change is fine, but I would just redesignate monies that are in the 2018 budget to carry forward to 2019. And how you do that, whether it's a resolution required, so it doesn't just sort of turn into accumulated surplus, then you have to go back to it. So we've got to channel through to that. Because I think, as Councillor Blackman points out, once you average them out, it's pretty much the same, with the obvious general increase factored into it.
So council, do we want to lobby the province, or are we just going to manage our budget? I think that's the question, which is why the letter was referred here, is do you want to join, municipalities that are going to be lobbying the province to help with that? Or not? Okay.
If we're gonna save money, we lobby.
Anyone else? Jason? Doug?
Well, I would just say, I mean, we're talking about $90,000, so, I mean, if the other municipalities are making waves and doing that already, I mean, I don't know. We could, but it just seems to me that maybe we might want to lobby to have, you know,
Transit.
other things, provincial spending in our community that would help our community, but that's my 2 cents.
All right, Doug, Patty?
Yeah, it's not a big thing for me. I mean, if there's a general groundswell, we can kind of join into it, but I think it was more important fish to fry, frankly.
Patty?
Yeah, I generally agree. I do think we should, you know, I was just making the assumption we'd do the carry forward to offset
Which we will.
2019. And maybe I'll just throw the question back to staff. Should we, considering we need to get up to 23, 26 by 2020, do we want to, as Councillor Race was talking about, buffer that a little bit more? And do we need to amend our financial plan bylaw to do that? Might not be necessary, but just to think about how we iron that out a bit. I don't want to expend a huge amount of political energy on this. However, I don't mind joining in a group. But I think it needs to be articulated really clearly, because if it's not, the province will just either dismiss it, think we're a bunch of whiners, or get angry at us. So it just has to be clearly articulated what the challenge is specifically for municipalities.
So to the mayor's first part of her question?
So we do not need to amend the financial plan. We can deal with it going into 2019 as an accumulated surplus use in the next year to reduce that tax impact and bring it back in line and make sure that we're at the 326 level by the time we come out of 2019 budget.
Okay. Does that help, Jason?
And earn that whole transition.
I would suspect that there's probably going to be a resolution at UBCM on that. You know, and I'll go with hope.
Great, thank you. Is that
So is that, is council good? I mean, to me, I always think the province generally needs constant reminders that they download stuff to municipalities all the time without really thinking about, you know, what that means. So, while, you know, I'm not sure we want to do a big lobbying effort, again, this is an example where they haven't really thought through the impact on municipalities fully. We're already writing letters about the other taxes. We can slide this one in there too.
Throw it on the pot.
I would say it's worth articulating a letter that's very clear about the support for general direction, and clearly articulating how it unfairly challenges municipalities in that one given year.
Do you want a motion to that effect?
Sure.
All right. That the mayor write a letter to the province, Minister of Finance? Articulating council's concerns about the transition from MSP to the employer's health tax. Is that enough?
I think so, yeah. And I mean, I think we want to give, I think we want to give them kudos that this is the right direction.
Yeah.
For this type of health tax. I'm glad they did. MSP was, no, okay, I'll stop.
Right, okay. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried.
I moved it, Ted seconded it.
Oh, right. Patty moved it, Ted seconded it.
Thank you.
Okay, we got two more, hopefully quick agenda items here.
I will do my best to run through them, and I don't want to do a disservice to Circa 8 at all. But I just wanted to swing back with council very quickly. I'll probably compress this a little more, but if you have any questions, please feel free.
So you're after a bit of direction from us today?
I am, actually. So I met with Jeff Cook and Melissa. I'm sorry, I don't recall Melissa's last name. She didn't bring me a card. Essentially, their concern boils down to having some understanding of the length of contract. So I felt them out about, is it the grant program? What is the grant program? Is it too logistically, administratively difficult? And Jeff's indication was, no, it's not really about the grant program. It's about understanding if we are going to have monies for longer than 1 year, because we have a vision and a goal and we're trying to accomplish certain things, and we'd like to staff up to do that. And we'd like to enter maybe multi-year contracts for trail maintenance. And we just need some certainty. So that was really the bone of their contention or their concern. And it was, they're amazing to work with. I will just be very clear about that. And the other thing was it is uncomfortable for them, and I think they expressed that to council, sometimes to be pitted against other really needing community organizations. Their goal ultimately is to get up to $150,000 maintenance budget, but they wholeheartedly indicated they're not necessarily looking at from the taxpayer. They would like to see them hooked up with tourism organizations, businesses that benefit from what they bring to the community. Right now, this is just for information, split of 60-20-20, so that $85,000 we give them, it gets split down to the 3 trail groups. And IMBA is very happy to help with consulting or helping, and last time I even talked to Jeff, possibly even for free. They did provide some very specific examples of other jurisdictions, which I did go and speak to directly. But when the smoke cleared in discussions with them, I'm not sure that we can't resolve this by council considering doing a multi-year grant. That wouldn't make them happy and satisfy their concerns. So what I wanted to touch base with, the key reason I'm here is, would you like us to engage IMBA to do a more fulsome review of everything that's going on in the province? I've so far gone back to the 2 jurisdictions they specifically told me about. One of them essentially is granting, has no agreement or anything in place. The other one is essentially contracting for service because they have no parks division themselves, and they actually contract services and enter construction contracts and other things, as well as a general kind of, can you go out there and deal with trails for us concept. So those ones I have touched base with. I also put a GFOA forum post up and really got nothing besides these specifically solicited ones. There might be other models out there, so it's really at this point I just wanted to touch base with council, see where you're at. Again, in talking to SORCA, I believe they are comfortable with us doing some kind of multi-year grant for now. I think that is comfortable to them, but I don't want to step around what council directed through budget either, so I want to make sure that we're not sidestepping what you asked for. The other thing is, I think there might be some other things that we could think about through Tourism Squamish, and it's probably too bad that we kind of went to the 5% or the 3% hotel tax without maybe looking at how they could help our trails group. But we'd have to do some more research on what they can and can't use the MRDT for. So I think there are some other models where maybe SORCA could leverage their other funding. But really what I think they're looking for is to stabilize the municipal funding so that they can bring in the staff that help them to leverage other funding sources and opportunities.
Okay, I've got Susan, then Jason, and then Doug.
Thanks. I think that in the future we should look at a tourism tax, because that's basically why, if there's something like a levy that we can put on tourism stays on top of our, I know the tourism tax goes to Tourism Squamish, but maybe there's something we can do outside of that, a per visitor $5 fee or whatever that comes through hotel stays. There's
Jurisdiction.
Tax beard.
We have tax beer, exactly. But there's got to be some other innovative model that we can extract funds for people coming to the district and using tourism resources. But maybe that fund looks at funding SORCA, but also funds other things like trailhead maintenance, and there's other costs that we have with tourism that we aren't extracting. We need bathrooms, we need facilities at trailheads. There's a lot of, we should really explore this on a more fulsome level, because it's not just SORCA that brings people to town. It's kiteboarding, it's all the recreation facilities that are not within our jurisdiction or our taxation purvey.
Okay, but let's focus on the direction we need to give proceeds.
Yeah, but if we're getting money
around SORCA and what's in the budget.
If we're getting money for SORCA, we can't just look at SORCA as a recreation provider. There's other providers. So are we looking at a fulsome way to afford trail maintenance and tourism infrastructure? Or are we looking at just SORCA as a one, like, I just don't think it's fair for the public to look at SORCA as a one-time deal. The tourism costs money. Tourism, we have a lot of money that goes out in our regular budgets. Is there an innovative way where we can also have SORCA be funded, but look at other tourism infrastructure as well, like a cost per head, or, you know, I agree with you about the tourism tax. I think we brought that up when that was coming through, that we need to extract money out of hotel taxes.
Chair Elliott, through you, I am very limited. We, as a local government, are very limited on our taxing authorities and our jurisdiction to tax. We have property tax, essentially, and parcel tax, and that's pretty well it. So you can absolutely fund tourism. You could do that as part of your tourism budget, but it would hit property tax. It would hit the ratepayers. So just to tell you about the innovation, that is a much bigger discussion than I think SORCA even requires right now. I think they're really looking at, can we get some stability, and then can we look at other funding models and options? And maybe it's tourism Squamish, maybe we encourage tourism Squamish to help contribute. I'm open to ideas. What I want to know is, would you like IMBA to go on and do some more research, as they indicate? Or are you comfortable with me taking it away and maybe bringing you back, or asking for a resolution for a multi-year contract? Because I think our current policy could also do that, depending. I mean, again, they're trying to leverage, they're trying to do multi-contracts, so that would probably fit within policy. Or I can tweak the policy to specifically address that type of...
So just to follow up, could we put it in our Parks and Recs budget? Like, it is something we fund every year. It does come out of taxation every single year. So there's no difference in funding it through a budget if we're going to do a multi-year. It's not going away. Doing a multi-year grant does the exact same thing as putting it into a budget.
I think there's an arm's length relationship on the grants.
There is, and one of the things that, like, when I look at the ones that have actually entered maintenance contracts, it is because they don't have staff working on it, and they enter it in that regard, and they enter it for advocacy for trails, and they enter it for things that we actually have staff doing. So it is cleaner, and Jeff and I certainly discussed this. You know, how much do you want us to dictate how and where and what you do, versus the grant program where I get to stay out here and kind of go, there you go do that amazing work you do. And I believe he's comfortable with that. By all means, you know, I'm happy to hear differently, but I ground truthed the email back and said, is this what I heard? Are we comfortable with that? And
I'm just exploring those models, because I think it's like understanding those differences is a huge thing for the public as well, but I think it's a sneaky way to do something that you're funding every year with taxation. It is not arm's length when you're giving the grant, but it's still public money, it still comes from the same place.
But it fits within our granting programs.
Yeah.
So I'm going to move on. Jason.
I'm okay with a 3-year, entertaining a 3-year agreement at this point. But I do think that in the next little while, we should really try and move away from funding it out of the community grant and aid. And the reason I say that is that, you know, we really tie our community grant and aid amount, the global amount, to, you know, a percentage of taxation. And my concern is that as the community gets bigger, there may be increased competition for those dollars for other very worthwhile, more sort of community grant, smaller project type of funding. And I wouldn't want those to miss out when, you know, maybe there's a way for us to, you know, I think it should be funded out of, you know, like a Parks and Recreation type of budget, in a way that, you know, understands that it's not being done by municipal staff, and there's some specific reasons around that, namely that we don't have, you know, clear title to a lot of these areas. So I think that would be the reason to explain why we'd be doing that, but it definitely has to be, I don't know, I think it's got to be rolled in at a certain point. I think we've been avoiding that for a while. But, you know, for the next one, I'm okay for a multi-year, just for now.
there are some options, Chair Elliott. We are looking under Business World where this grant and aid would actually show up under tourism Grantville Recreation. So we're actually splitting the grants and aid up. We could also revisit the policy and talk to specific prescribed amounts for X percentage for this. We can expand that policy without putting it into a contracted service context. So I think there's lots of things we can do, but still leave it in a more arm's length situation. I'm happy to explore that with council. I just would like a little bit of direction back as to what's comfortable for you, and then we can explore.
Yeah. So I'm not hearing anyone say yet that they want IMBA to do research. My only concern is that we have wording in there that we can only have so many multi-year contracts at a time, and they take up a huge amount of that budget. So I wouldn't want to limit the ability of not-for-profits doing social services type of work, because we've signed a 3-year contract. So I think we do need to look at the language in the grant and aid policy to make sure that if they get this huge chunk of 3-year funding, that it doesn't take away from our ability to provide multi-year grants to community groups. Ted, and then Patty.
And I think the next council is going to probably expand on this because Circa has been asking for a different model. We're all talking about a different model, but I don't see me being part of that change. I see the next council being part of that change, so I'm happy with this for now.
Patty, Doug.
Yeah, I'm happy.
Doug.
Yeah, I'm happy too, and I just wanted, when I first put my hand up, I just wanted to clarify, we're talking now about the 2019 budget, I take it, because we've already done the 2018 budget, and they got a grant of the 2018 budget. So am I correct in saying that?
We had money in the budget for IMBA to do research. We set aside a small amount of money. So I think
putting research aside, when we're talking about a 3-year grant, that's 3 years starting 2019 or 3 years starting 2018?
So council, that's really up to you. The financial plan has continued to assume that we would continue to budget $85,000 a year for the group, the Trails Group Societies. So it would not require a financial plan amendment. We just need your commitment to it. They want something tangible that they can take away and know that they're not going to have to beg for it next year, so that they can get some continuity in their operations.
Susan, Patty.
Thank you. That exact language is what every single community group that comes to get grant and aid uses. Everybody wants continuing funding. I'm not sure why Sorka, above all others, why not the hospice? Why not Women's Center? We have these important groups that every year we grant the exact same amount. I'm sure every group would like security. I just think that this is Parks and Recs. This has to do with tourism. We have a ton of tourism infrastructure, and we need to weigh those things appropriately with each other. Yes, Sorka is an amazing group. They also have the ability to earn cash, raise their rates, which not-for-profits don't. They have the ability to go out for grants. And I love them a lot. I use the trails, but when you're looking at municipal funding that's weighed against other things, when you're dictating that one group above all others gets consistent funding, you're taking away from the other groups. So I do want them to have consistent funding, but it should be either in the budget, not weighed against social services. So I'm not sure if I agree with this. I think this really warrants a community conversation about community grants. It's really easy to say, yep, just give them what they want, because it really takes the stress off them. But you're taking away from social services we have a specific amount in community grants, and now social services is weighed against a sports group, which is not a fair equation, as well as trailheads and other services that we need for tourism. It's not the only tourism aspect, there's also climbing. The climbing group, climbers doesn't come, and we don't fund climbing or bolts rehabilitation or anything, trail crews for climbing.
So there's potentially a larger conversation to be had in another committee about how we fund tourism infrastructure, but it's not today.
Just saying that it weighs that, you're not weighing what needs to be weighed against the appropriate infrastructure. You're just saying, should Sorka get a grant or not? Instead of, let's look at our community grants and who gets continuing funding, and it's definitely not fair to the other groups in the community grants that we're weighing this outside of that. And I know I'm not saying we don't need Sorka to have funding, I just think that community grants is an inappropriate way to sneak by policy so that we have an arm's length relationship.
So I would disagree with the word sneak. We're trying to be very open and upfront about it, so let's try to stay away from that wording. Patty, I'm going to go to you.
Yes. I think we generally all agree. the current system is not ideal. And we're trying to figure out how to give Sorka the certainty that they can plan out for a couple of years while not pitting different pieces against, while staying within our legal whatevers. So
Why Sorka, not the other?
Okay, just let Penny finish.
I think what I'd like perhaps council to consider is, let's consider the 3-year at this point, just because that gives them some certainty to plan, which is what they want. But figure out how to actually put it in the budget appropriately. And maybe we start to think about our corporation as something that actually manages these tourism assets. So maybe this is a budget piece that we actually fund through the Squamish Sustainability Corporation that allows us to be arm's length. But I'd like to get us to there. I think we've talked about a variety of community partnerships, whether it's the Arts Council, Sorka. Those are all within the municipal purview. And I think what I'm hearing from council is the grants and aids are those things, should be focused on more of those things that maybe technically aren't within our mandate under the community charter, but are very important to our community that we want to fund through grant and aid, like the social services, like the kids groups, and we have our parameters for that. And segregate out these more community partnership type things and figure out a different way to fund them within our legislative authority that allows us to do it. And maybe the Squamish Sustainability Corporation is that entity that allows that planning piece that, you know, the Arts Council, Sorka, and some of these others that are delivering recreation arts, which is something we deliver anyway. We're just trying to figure out a different creative way of funding that, as opposed to simply through our general. Anyway, so what I'm suggesting is we do the 3-year for now, just so they can plan. But ideally, by the fall, we have a different mode of actually transitioning into a different system of paying that.
Sounds good to me.
Well, I'm not sure we would get there by the fall.
Nope.
But I think
I'd like
by
to
the
get
end of
to
that
that.
3-year term, there's other options for funding.
I think we could do it sooner than that, but yeah.
I won't.
It's an interim measure, so you have alternatives up here. Christine, do you want to speak to them?
Again, I'm sorry I didn't really get to expand and talk to you about why I'm bringing you these alternatives, so it's a little bit out of context, but to mirror Heinzman's point, I think that the multi-year grant would satisfy them in the interim. You could bring in IMBA as well to do research, but really they're just researching what other municipalities are already doing, so I'm not sure you're going to get that innovative solution, and I only have so much jurisdiction, so it would still have to come back to staff to ground truth it and make it viable. We could direct, staff to approach Tourism Squamish to look into more whether they're open to doing some of the funding, and we can encourage Sorka to look. Most of these models were driven regionally. The ones they gave me were actually from the regional governments, not municipalities. Municipalities also provided some grants and aid, but it was actually the regional structure that was providing a broader, through the electoral areas and everything, of funding. And 9 times out of 10, it is still grant and aid. We can put it somewhere else in the budget or whatever. At the end of the day, you are prioritizing everything every time you do a financial plan, and you're always deciding that that's a big enough key in your community that you're doing it. So do we need to enter prescriptive contracts with them? Again, my concern being that we're contracting them to do stuff outside of our municipal boundaries because our park staff do our boundaries.
Done?
Yeah, 2 points. I mean,
It was on the list, Susan.
I had my hand up before. It only restrains us and it only affects other potential grant recipients if we let it. So policy is just policy. We can change it as we see fit. So we're not competing. We're not setting up somebody to fail. The other thing is the reason we have not had it as a line item in the budget in previous years, and we've discussed this many times, is because the funds go outside of our boundaries and they also get spent on private properties. And so that is the hurdle to get around it. Grant and aid to Sorka is a convenient way of getting around that hurdle and let them go out and spend the money outside of the District of Squamish. So I've already had a discussion with the area director for the SLRD, and he's open to the idea of creating a common funding arrangement for those trails that are outside and pool of funds, and then we don't necessarily have to be specific whether they're spent inside or outside. It doesn't get us over the private property hurdle, but we can probably deal with that with license agreements or something. So there are solutions, I think, out there. This to me is the interim step, as the mayor says, allows us to work those things out. They're not quite simple, they take a little bit of work to do, but it gives us a year or two to do that. But it does not affect other potential grant recipients unless we let it affect.
So the direction you're looking for today is whether to use the money in the budget for INVA or just proceed based on your conversations with Jeff. Is that what you're looking for?
And whether council would be amenable to us putting a commitment letter out to them for longer than 2018.
Susan?
Second.
So I'd like to continue conversations, and I agree that there's other models, and that because there's other models, I don't think I would agree to a multi-year commitment. That would give 2 multi-year commitments of a very specific amount of money, which sounds like budgeting to me. It is budgeting, and for the arm's length reasons, and the partnership with the SLRD is very important. I think that's a worthwhile thing, and we agree to money. There's no real reason, except for when that expires, to go out and find innovative models. We have funded them for this year. They have a year of full-on funding through our grant and aid program. In the next year's budget, I'd like to look at exploring a partnership with the SLRD and looking at more innovative ways, like the mayor mentioned, maybe possibly doing it through our other corporations. And we can fund those corporations in order to fund them. But I do, because it has to be a wholesome look within, just doing this for one, I just see this opening floodgates and setting a precedent for all our groups, because we'd have to fund through community grants all our other resources. All it would take is an economic development study to say, look how much climbing brings in, look how much kite surfing brings in. It would be really difficult for me to explain to other groups why we only give multi-year community grants to one group. And it's not because I don't think it's necessary. I just think that doing it this way pits groups against groups and is not the right way to go at this time. So I'll be voting against a multi-year contract. I don't mind continuing negotiations.
So is there someone who would like to put a motion on the floor?
I'll put a motion for
I'll second that.
that council direct staff to, it's not up there, who wrote the other one?
What other one? Sorry.
The 3, the direct council to enter into a 3-year, what are we calling it? Grant and aid?
Commitment to community grant.
With SORCA, and that an alternative funding mechanism be investigated. And I'm not sure we need to do that through IMBA. So however, I would say, and that the IMBA PC budget is not implemented or something.
May I just clarify, we actually put the grant currently to not split hairs, but it's not just SORCA, it's SORCA at the trails.
Yeah, the trails groups.
Thank you, just to be clear on the.
So the motion is for the trails.
Yeah.
As a friendly amendment, can we ensure that the grant and aid policy wording is such that we don't limit the ability of other not-for-profits to achieve multi-year grants?
Absolutely, yeah, so that's my idea.
Is anyone seconding that motion? Ted is seconding.
And just to speak to it, this is an interim thing. I think there's some either through the service agreement or through the SLRD or service, whatever they call it. But that takes some time, the process to go through the SLRT to determine that, and then RAD and Squamish would, or maybe it's through Tourism Squamish, or maybe it's through the SSC. But we look at another mechanism to ensure. And then if other entities want to bring us the cases Councillor Chappelle has articulated, they get evaluated on an individual basis.
And just to speak to it
Yep.
also, SORCA was in here a while ago talking to us about their need for this 3-year and the reasons behind they wanted the 3-year one. And I listened to that, and at that point, made a lot of sense for me to give them a 3-year one. We talked about any group coming in wanting multi-year ones for business case scenarios where they might need to borrow money, but they need a 3-year commitment from us to cover their loan payments. So I understand the need for that, and any group can have that. and Sorka brings us 20-cent dollar value. So every 20 cents we give them, we get $1 value out of it. So I don't have to explore anything. I know the next council will be revisiting it, because our financial arm has told us they're looking for a new way to fund this. Say no more.
I just.
Do you have something you
I have
add?
a comment. So are all groups able, so every group with this motion will be able to come back for a 3-year grant, including hospice and every,
So-
everybody can come back for a 3-year grant?
Thank you.
They can apply.
Through Chair Elliott, we have a policy right now that does set out some parameters around when we would consider a 3-year term. I will certainly review that in the context of us doing this. It may be that council just wants to override their policy right now in the interim while we sort this out, or we can make an amendment to the policy if we think that it needs to be broader than that. We don't ever stop any any funding or community grant agency from coming in and requesting a multi-year grant, but we do have language in our policy that indicates when we might consider that and to what level, because we don't want to restrict the entire grant and aid policy. So it may be that I do need to review the policy and provide you some potential amendments to make it work in the interim, or you can decide to override your policy in the interim. That's council's prerogative as well.
All right, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Councillor Chappelle opposes. We have a motion to close. Oh, shit.
yeah.
So, okay, 2 minutes padding to
Yeah,
regulation tax.
so we had a conversation last week about the speculation tax. At the time, the provincial government seemed to be under a lot of scrutiny because of it, and there was some things that were unclear. I haven't dug into it deeply. However, the province made announcements yesterday that make it more specific to not cabins, only places that are unattended for over 6 months of the year. And they determined it could be only about 99% of real estate would be exempt from this, or people would be exempt from this, I should say. So I think, generally, it's trending more towards a tax on wealth than some other things, and even than the foreign buyers tax. I don't know how much of a challenge this would be for us to understand potentially how many homes in Squamish would be affected by this type of thing. It's only over $3 million, so we don't have a ton of properties over $3 million for one. Is that correct? Yeah.
Oh, no.
Sorry.
400,000.
Different. 400,000. That's right. Secondary. So we have a lot of properties over 400,000.
Empty.
And it's only if they're empty, so people are just buying them to sit on them or to come 1 or 2 weeks out of the year. I don't know how big a challenge it would be. I know West Kelowna has done some analysis, and they have a massive amount of people from Alberta that invest in their community. So they have and they're a brand new municipality, so they're challenged. But as the more details come out, I'm starting to like this potentially more and more. And the biggest challenge is if we're outside of it, the pressure that might put on our housing market. Even if we didn't like the tax, being outside of it might cause even undue pressure.
So currently, the motion in terms of the letter last week was that we want to be included in the foreign buyers tax, but that we were going to sit on the sideline for the speculation tax.
Yeah.
So I guess the question is, does council want to change that direction based on new information? Do we still want to wait on the sidelines, or do we want to take a position at this time? Ted,
Well,
Jason?
they've just changed this in the last couple of days. I haven't even had a chance to review it. I just saw a little bit of on the news. So,
I can hold back on
I'd rather
writing
have
a
at least
letter
10
if we
minutes
want.
to talk
Yeah.
about it, and I'd like to read it.
Jason?
Yeah, for me, it's a preemptive move. It's not really about necessarily what the current condition is. I think it is really about, if this gets applied to all the major metropolitan regions across the province, and yet Squamish is not included, we'll be the #1 destination for this type of speculation or, second home buying. And I think that it has to, we just have to be on the same level playing field with that. And, there's still an option. people can purchase second homes and all of that. It's just that they are going to pay a little bit more for the privilege of doing so. And that's really key for keeping our prices from escalating even further than they are now.
I'd still like to review it and then have a discussion.
Okay.
It's just,
So.
We can defer
the letter until people have had more
Committee of the whole
time.
next week or something, and
Okay. So we'll defer it until subsequent meeting.
then I won't send a letter until we...
Okay, so people have more, council, do your homework.
Good job
On this
for
one.
further.
So we have to move move to next week's committee of the whole meeting. Do you have a committee of the whole? Yeah. No, we have CDC.
CDC is next week.
Pretty tight.
It's tight.
Either next week or the week after.
Okay, we'll meet
And
next
deferral of sending the letter until we've had that conversation.
conversation. Is that a motion? Second by Susan, all those in favor? All those motion carried. We do have a motion to move into closed. So can I have a motion for that? Moved by Patty, second by Peter, all those in favor? Opposed, motion carried.